Game begin.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Spy Colony podcast. I am here with 2 and a G for 3-3 Elephant, Michael J. Flores.
Yeah, that stings, man. Stings.
And I'm your co-host, 3 and a G for a 3-3 Elephant, Lanny Wong.
I went 3-1 in the meetup this week. Lost to Big Bill, who ended up winning the belt. I played the sickest freaking sequence where he had like an early Sphere of Resistance, another Sphere of Resistance, and then double Oath. But I just like navigated it to kill one of his spheres so that I could cast my combo, and then I comboed, played Vision Charm to get around his double Oath the first turn, and then double Stifled the next turn. And he's just like, wow, that was sick. And then he had no cards in hand. And then 2 and a G Elephant, and I'm like, what do I do here? I'm like blocks of the Elephant and Mishra's Factory stays on 2 life, right? Like, but I can't not attack, right? Because he's gonna get the flashback next turn, right? This is gonna become untenable.
Yeah, you can't stifle 2 oaths.
Yeah,
every turn.
I just stifled 2 oaths, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, and I'm like, gosh, and I'm like, oh, I could get a Vision Charm. I put him on 2, and then I'm like, I just need him to flip over like no land with this Terravor, and I'll trample him to death, right? But no, Terravor came in as like a 13/13. It was sad times. I had a 3rd Stifle, but I didn't have the 4th Stifle.
Yeah.
So yeah, it stinks. 2 and a G for a 3/3.
And that is actually, I actually still want to work on my 5-color Dreadnought deck that just takes the GAT mana base and lets you play Dreadnought with Call of Herds and Rave Revelation and like goodies.
That's what you played this week at the meetup, right?
That is correct.
How did you do?
I went 1-1 and then I went to go get dinner.
It's funny. You left and then Ryan came.
Yeah, because we mixed up. We mixed up where we were gonna, like, she thought we were meeting at the bar. I thought we were meeting at the restaurant. But regardless,
did she drive?
She just got in a lift.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I did some testing, some private testing with the 5-color Dreadnought deck because I was just like, this is broken. It doesn't lose to red game 1 because Grotog loses to red game 1. And then in round 1, I played against Black-White Control. Players new to the format, new to Magic. It's like he was like only playing Magic for like a year. He only plays Commander and Limited. He was playing the Black-White Control deck, and then I just like lost to Infinite Removal, where Grotog normally is quite good. I mean, there were like variables, right? Like he opened on Swamp, and so I was on the play. So my turn 2 Meddling Mage, I named Smother, and then his second land was Plains, and I was like, oh. And then it was all downhill from there because he had 2 Swords to Plowshares. But the bigger picture is that I was just like this. If you just like add, because people have been telling me to like just play Dreadnought in Grotog for years, and I'm just like, well, that's dumb because Dreadnought is 2 cards and Quarian Dryad is 1 card, power and toughness notwithstanding. But when I added the accumulated knowledge to Grotog, all of a sudden I was just like, well, I can afford to lose 2 cards now because I've got like sort of 2 engines in the deck. Anyways, lost the Black-White Control. Grotog never loses the Black-White Control, at least in my experience. So back to the drawing board on the 5-color Dreadnought concept. But I did defeat Red-Green Oath in testing. Did a little testing. Red-Green Oath just like ran out of cards, and I was just like, well, I'll AK for 5.
Speaking of decks that surprisingly beat Red-Green Oath, the most impressive deck in Premodern, I think, right now is Monoblue Tide.
Monoblue Tide doesn't beat Red-Green Oath.
I don't know. Andy told me that he was testing with Bill and he was winning more than he was losing.
Okay, I mean that's fair. Like
he said they have a surprisingly small amount of green mana. He said, like, you can pin certain amount of green mana. You can get some of it with a Dust Bowl. They actually can't cast their spells.
Yeah. Like, oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's probably nuance there, but like I went into the matchup on the Red-Green Oath side, and I was just like, oh, I don't know if I beat Tide. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe Bill was just sideboarding differently than I would have. Because what happened was the Tide deck runs however many non-basic lands, like 12 or whatever, 10?
1,000.
4 factories, 4 quicksand, 2 Dust Bowl or whatever. So in order for Dust Bowl, so 4 Mistress Factory, X Conclave, so a lot of non-basics. So in order for Dust Bowl to be online, they need to have 4 mana, and they also need to have the Dust Bowl. And none of those things were happening. Like, so the very basic plan of like Sphere of Resistance, infinite land destruction worked pretty well. I don't know if maybe if you have your Force Spike, you can get out. But Sphere of Resistance is actually like sort of good because it makes Tide combo 7 mana. And it just puts Tide back a turn too. And so like every time I play the matchup, it was very similar to like the Landstill matchup, where it's like Landstill is trying to like break the synergy of like, you know, casting Standstill and having land mana advantage, like with man lands or whatever. And like Red Green Oath is just better at being a Landstill deck. It's like the better non-basic land deck. But I guess if you stick it to Fairy's Response post sideboard, or you can get a sweet divert even, maybe that changes things.
I think, I don't know if we talked about this before on the podcast, but Monoblue Tide was so impressive against goblins. Like,
yeah, we talked about it last time.
Shockingly impressive. And so I did some testing after the meetup. Played it against Tron. It was pretty good. Played it against
played what Monoblue Tide or goblins?
Monoblue Tide and goblins, actually.
Yeah, I can see why Monoblue Tide would be good against Tron, though. That's that makes a lot of sense.
Monoblue Tide against Dreadnought. I won the first couple with the Dreadnought side, but then I think that Monoblue Tide should be advantaged, and it won a bunch in a row after I won the first couple of games. So I think like it is very good against decks that I respect. It's great against goblins. I don't know how it doesn't seem like it'd possibly be very good against elves. Yeah, it seems like a nightmare.
I mean, I haven't seen somebody playing elves since my last YouTube video, actually. But like my YouTube opponent on elves like completely surprised me. It was like the first time I played elves in probably like 20-30 matches. So elves is on an all-time low. Assuming that's just because of, you know, how popular goblins is. But I don't know. Like the Tide thing, like I just keep on. I don't know what it's Andy, right? Who's been playing it? Yeah. So I don't know what his list looks like, but just going off
Factor Fiction, no standstills.
I like no standstills. I mean, definitely having 0 standstills in your deck is like a good way to not lose to Red Green Oath, because those are just going to be the first thing that you board out. But the Monoblue Tide decks, the 2 that topped, I think it was Spain. Yeah, it was Spain. So it was Oscar Garcia, who got 3rd place in Spanish Nationals. And Replenish is basically a Tide deck. What's actually kind of funny is that Replenish and Tide kind of weirdly like eat each other's lunch, where like Tide beats Replenish, but is probably worse against... well, I don't know.
Like if you're playing against red deck, you'd much rather be Replenished than Monoblue Tide, I think.
I would assume so. But yeah, I don't know. I hate talking about these decks that like the list is like still up in the air. So you're just like, oh, well, they changed a few cards, or their sideboard's different, and then they're more advantage against red. Like, so for instance, Oscar Garcia's Tide control list has 2 chill 5 blast in the sideboard. So all he's doing is like throwing game 1, or like maybe he can get lucky Tide combo, and then in games 2 and 3 it just has 1,000 sideboard cards for
yeah, but that's not even that coherent of a plan, right? Like you're basically upgrading your counter spells, I think, to some degree, but you still have to leave in.
No, you don't upgrade your counter spells. You board in Swords of Plowshares. It's a huge. Oh yeah, so I was like thinking about this the other day because I had the same thought. Remember, like I had my Storm deck and I was like, blasts are dumb. Like, why would I play blast when like 60% of the time it's counterspell and it's only some of the percentage of the time it's Swords of Plowshares? Why don't I just play counterspell? Especially because I get 1 mana counterspell with the rock in play. But for this Tide control deck, like all you need is to be able to board in Swords of Plowshares, because you just need to survive until turn 4 or 5.
Yeah, but you still need to be able to tide combo them, which is actually awkward against their Pyroblasts. It's not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree. I agree that Pyroblast is good, but what do you think about being a burn player that has to leave a mountain untapped every single turn? It's just like playing around days almost. And then what if the Tide player just simply also waits one turn longer and then plays Tide combo with Blast backup?
I think it just depends on your draw. Like sometimes you have these draws, you're just like, I'm gonna jam Ball Lightning on turn 3 and see what happens. Right? Like
yeah, then your Ball Lightning is probably getting blasted. The other thing is like these burn players are just playing like 2 or 3 blasts sometimes, you know?
Yeah, but
like I see a list with like 3 red blasts, and I'm just like, I don't know.
Getting your Ball Lightning blasted isn't the worst thing in the world, right? It's a 1-for-1.
It's a it's a 3-for-1 actually.
ish, right? But it's also a 1-for-1
like hear me out. Ball Lightning, blast, impulse, tide combo you. Like I don't know. It's just like that's like the thing, right? It's like all of the
your blast might have gone to your Jackal Pup earlier. What are they gonna take 6?
I've got 5. I can like Ball Lightning into blast is so bad because the blue player gets to play 5 blasts, at least if you're Oscar Garcia, and you get an impulse into your blast, right? So you can, if you're Ball Lightning, then you're casting 3 mana blast. Like I don't get me wrong, like I think that if you have Ball Lightning in your hand and you have RRR, you should probably just cast Ball Lightning and see what happens. But like
that's what I just said.
But whether or not that's good is just not, like, I don't know. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's like it's bad against 4 spike, mana leak, counterspell, and 5 blasts.
I mean, 4 spike is so good.
And quicksand, but obviously
it's so good, but I would upgrade that to a hydroblast as fast as I could.
Obviously you can't show, I mean, don't you just like cut some random card draw? Like you cut your stupid disc in powder kegs.
No, powder kegs are pretty good.
Powder kegs are horrible. Because the Jackal Pup gets paid before Powder Keg even has a counter. It's like turn 1 Pup. It's like Powder Keg. I'm like Pup in. It's like, okay, next turn attack with Pups. Like blow up your counter Powder Keg. You traded 2 mana for 1 mana, 1 card for 1 card, and 2 damage. It's just like the burn player would do that all the time, right?
Yeah, that's like
discard a card, deal 2 damage.
If he looks in his primer, that's just like try to get this sequence.
Yeah. I mean, it's like turning all your cards into Blightning is so basically what
I'd like you to do is make your opponent spend twice as much mana as you and take damage.
Yeah, and still take damage. Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me to thinking about 3 gears. You like to say a few things. You like to say finding the 3 gears is about modern burn, not pre-modern burn. And the pre-modern burn
it was written about modern burn, but BK was the first person to point out that it's applicable to basically every deck.
It's applicable to every deck. Okay, yeah, so hear me out. Let's say the 3 gears of every deck. Okay, 3 gears of every deck. Gear 1, kill your opponent. Gear 2.
Gear 1 is combo.
Gear 1 is kill your opponent, and Gear 2 is stop your opponent from killing you.
Okay.
And Gear 3 is just neutral.
Gear 3 is kill your opponent slowly.
Well, so Gear 3, and here's the reason why Gear 3 is neutral. Because in Gear 3, you're a neutral, and you're rolling down the hill. And if you're heavier than your opponent, then you'll win. Or I think about it like this. You know those terrariums? You just like put all the shit in a glass bowl, and then only sunlight is added to the thing, and the terrarium like sustains itself. You seen those?
You don't put water?
Yeah, you put like it's self-sustaining because it's a literal like sealed glass bowl. So all the water, oxygen, all the stuff in it recycles. So it's like plants and living organisms that are all like, you know, like feeding off each other. So the only energy that you're adding to the system is sunlight. Enter magic. In a Gear 3 game, the only energy you're adding is draw steps, right? So if you have 2 decks and they're just like their little ecosystem, and they're just drawing 1 card per turn, it's just a question of which deck wins, right?
This is just like a lot of analogies, and you know how I feel about analogies.
Regardless, that's why we talked about why. So this brings up basically 15 different Spike Colony podcast topics. First of which, Golems versus Burn. One of the big reasons that we don't like burn, or we thought we didn't like burn, is that you have neither Gear 1 nor Gear 3, right? So you can't kill your opponent because your opponent has a better kill you plan. Like they are more likely. Like you can't ignore the creatures unless your opponent just simply doesn't play any creatures, and you can't put your car in neutral and roll down the hill because your opponent has a heavier car. Like the spells coming off the top of their library, they deal more damage. They gain more cards. So you sort of only have the stop your opponent from killing you strategy, which is more difficult. Like it's more difficult to navigate than other gear 2 stop your opponent from killing you plans. But the reason why I thought this was interesting was because we also talked a couple weeks ago about first order answer, like threats, answers, and like second order answers, right? And I was just like thinking to myself, I was like, well, we just like went full circle back to who's the beatdown, because the question of who's the beatdown is just who's killing who, right?
Well, I guess to some degree, who's the beatdown is just like, am I supposed to be in gear 1 or gear 2?
Exactly.
Right?
It's just the theory. It's like the theory of everything. It's like, am I trying to kill my opponent or is my opponent trying to kill me? And who's better at killing who? And who's in the stop? Like, who should be Swords to Plowsharing and attacking, or Swords to Plowsharing and hanging back to block, or, using their cards to trade with cards, or using their cards to trade with life points, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or like attacking mana. Like, I don't know. You would have to comb through examples, but I feel like you can almost just boil these games, like the most games of Magic or matchups, down to like, well, who gets to be in gear 1? Right?
Yeah, like in contemporary Magic, it's just all about going first and just jamming gear 1 as fast as you can.
Right. But that's actually like pretty. It's like a good framework for like analyzing what's different about contemporary Magic, right? Because a +1 mana advantage on your opponent is so much better, because what you're spending your mana on is unbelievable power. And
I posted that video with finding the 3 gears with like a contemporary standard red deck. Like the standard red decks right now don't even play Shock and Lightning Strike. Like they just like.
Yeah, they just are a combo deck, right?
You just try to solo your opponent with pump spells, and like, so the thing that I found as I was playing, so I win the mirror match most of the time, and a big part of winning the mirror match is just I assume they never have it because they don't.
Yeah, you're not playing red deck, you're playing Infect. Like I think.
Like, here's all my stuff.
And there's no deck in the pre-modern era that behaves like Infect does. Like the closest that we have is just. I mean, none of these decks can win on turn 3, I
guess the contemporary standard red deck wins on turn 3 a lot.
That's what I'm saying. No pre-modern deck wins on turn 3. But that's like the big point, right? So even Infect was a deck that existed before the Fire era. So even the difference between 2003 Magic and 2014 Magic is like still salient here. But
well, I think just to be fair, Infect is a great deck. Like, Tom the Boss Ross was just such a monster with Infect across multiple formats. And guys like Jeff Jow, came back for the Gathering with Infect. Well, the thing that I'd say about Infect, which is to some degree a standard deck, I did pretty well in it with a standard blue-green Infect, with like way worse cards, obviously. Like there's the modern version had such better cards than the standard version. But the thing that I'd say is like that deck is very gear 2-able, and like if you wanted to beat it by going gear 2, you kind of could. But then at the same time, they had the ability to play counterplay with cards like Spellskite, and that was like pretty exciting. So in a way, Infect is very, very interactive, right? Like because of how your opponent might try to deal with you, and then how you might try to deal back.
Yeah,
like, and versus like a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, where you're just like, all right, this red deck is just Infect. It's like there's none of that, right? Like it's just jamming and speed, right? Like a card like a Blazing Crescendo, which costs 2, is kind of like disadvantageous because it costs 2. And like the difference between a 2 mana and a 1 mana threat right now they're like insanity. Like the 1 mana threats are really good, but the 2 mana threats are like slick shot show off. If you untap with one and play, they're dead. Like they either have a removal spell or they take 100 damage, right? Like, so I don't know what point I was making. It's about fire design, I guess.
It's fair.
It's just like the interactivity is way different than it was at the height of Infected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's fair. I think like the bigger thing is just that it's interesting because not many successful decks in pre-modern, effectively can't change gears. Pre-modern is like a super wide metagame, and one of the like the simple like debates that kind of comes up is just like, should you play 4 copies of Swords of Plowshares in your Replenish main deck?
You shouldn't play 2 copies. I'll tell you that.
Guess who is
who won the PSS playing 2 copies?
Guess who's in the
Lanny
top?
Wong.
Guess who's in the top 16 of the monthly? Probably the top 8 with 2 copies in his main deck as well.
I don't know who.
The venerable Dr. Richey.
Yeah. So the one thing I know is that 2 copies of Swords of Plowshares is not the right number. I played 1. 1 plus 3 because 1 is a miracle. I could talk forever about 1 is a miracle.
We could talk about that. I mean, I actually just said, we've actually said it on the podcast. I said in my last video, I played 1 Ray of Revelation in my new Grotog list, and I was just like, I hate playing like a card like this in the main deck or Grotog, but 1 is infinitely more than 0. 2 is only twice as much as 1, but 1 is infinitely more than 0.
2 is like the second time somebody ran a 4-minute mile, nobody knows that guy's name. Right? Like nobody knows that guy's. The thing that's amazing is that the first time somebody ran a 4-minute mile, that was like, oh wow.
This is a horrible analogy. This analogy doesn't transpose onto Magic at all.
But like 3 people ran a 4-minute mile after. Is it Bannister who ran the 4-minute mile first? I'm just talking about who. I think it's Bannister.
Okay. Regardless, 1 and 0 is like the difference between the Grotog deck scooping to Opal Wave and playing it out, right? So I got tired of scooping to Opal Wave, so I was just like, I'm just gonna put 1 Ray of Revelation, and sometimes I'll have it, and sometimes I will discard it to foil, and then I'll still have it, and sometimes I'll get it to rest, and I'll still have it. But I can't have it if I get Phyrexian Furnace. But alas, yeah. Rich is playing in the finals of the July monthly versus Flippy with his 2 copies of Swords of Plowshares main deck. He has gone on with the Mana Leak innovation. He plays the 1 Stifle, which makes me want to die. He's only playing 3 Intuitions, which make me want to die. But then again, he's in the finals and I'm not. But he's got 4 Opalescence, so at least there's that. And he's got my favorite tech in Replenish, of course, the singleton copy of Cephalid Coliseum. And this list appears to be 24 lands, something like 24 lands. But we did some more testing with Mana Leak, and Mana Leak makes the deck super interesting. It makes it more likely to win game 1s against Dreadnought, which I thought was pretty impressive. But running fewer Swords to Plowshares, I mean, it's like kind of interesting because it's like if you run fewer Swords to Plowshares, but your opponent doesn't know that you have fewer than 4, then your opponent's still going to name Plowshares, but they're not turning out 4 cards instead of 2. But yeah, anyways. I don't know. Like, I play a lot of this Replenish deck, and I started winning a lot more when I had 4 Swords of Plowshares main deck.
I think that there's a lot of different numbers of Swords of Plowshares you can play, and the one that I wouldn't play is 2. I'm down with 1. I'm really down with 3.
1, 3, or 4. 3's great.
3 sounds great, right? 4 is even more.
3's lazy. 3 is like, well, I got Intuition in my deck, so I might have to do 3.
It's great. But man, 2. It's just the boring version of 1 that you can't Intuition for.
Fair enough. I mean, Rich has 2 Seal of Cleansing, 2 Plowshares.
I mean, that's literally the Lanny Huang split.
Yeah,
right?
It is.
That's the
but the only reason I did that split was because I just didn't, like, I couldn't, I had 12, or I had 6 slots on my deck to split between Plowshare, Seal of Cleansing, and Careful Study. And I just like couldn't decide. So I was just like, I'll do 2 of each. And then I had just hit submit. I didn't like think about it more, right?
Now, the reason that your deck was built the way it was is because you had Maximum Diamond.
I mean, that's true, but
you didn't have Maximum Diamond. Like, nobody else has Maximum Diamond.
Now they just have Mana Leak. Now they just have Mana Leak, or they have like whatever I don't know. It's a little all over the place. But the point is Replenish, like, this is just like a lifelong debate. Is Replenish, like, it's such a weird deck because it's like a kill your opponent deck sometimes, and sometimes it's to stop your opponent from killing you sometimes. And then sometimes it is just like a inevitability deck. It's like eventually I will draw Opalescence and win.
Replenish is just the rock, right? You just play forecasting cost things that are pretty good, and then you just play them a bunch of turns in a row, and sometimes your opponent can't deal with all of them.
Well, the thing about the rock is that the rock doesn't really have gear 1, right?
It's like gear 1 is playing a bunch of forecasting cost things in a row.
Like gear one for the, what is gear 1 for the rock? Just like
a turn 5 sideways Baloth.
Like, just try to imagine a deck that the rock is like the beatdown against.
What deck was? I mean, let me think. That's a beatdown against like land still.
Okay. What else?
Tron. You better beat them, right? Like if you, I guess.
Interesting.
Because you have to, right? Otherwise, they're just gonna cast. Like,
well, against Tron, I think you're neither. Like you're neither. You're neither killing or stopping them from killing. Because
you're not stopping them from killing you.
Yeah, so you can't stop them, and you also can't really kill them, right? That's the point. The rock can't kill anyone. It takes. What is the fastest kill for the rock? What's the fastest kill?
What version of the rock are we talking about?
Like, if you go everything but natural order doesn't count, right? Because that natural order, at least plausibly, you kill your opponent.
First turn, Birds of Paradise. Second turn, Call of the Herd. You're in the zone.
You're in the zone. They're gonna be dead on turn 9.
I mean, like it's a lot faster.
Once turn 9 rolls around, it's all over.
Well, no, not really. Who can't stop a 0 casting cost?
Exactly.
So you're saying its casting cost is 0,
but this is
and you just like look at this variety of cards in your hand that can deal with a 0 casting cost card. Like, yeah.
Okay, so
maybe 2 of them.
But this is why it's such it's a good framework for pre-modern. It's a good way to describe why the rock is bad, because I think people like to say like what's the most popular definition of mid-range?
What is the most popular definition of mid-range?
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever had to answer that question. I would say like they're decks that you are the beatdown or the control like a high percentage of the time.
Exactly, right?
So like half the time you're the beatdown, half the time you're the
beatdown. The most popular definition is a deck that wants to change rules depending on the deck that they're playing against, right? So
that's every deck, though.
Exactly. I agree that that's every deck. So I like that you gave it a split, but I think that the reason why I said most popular, right, is that like when people look at Burn, they just think it's always the beatdown deck. And that's why 3 Gears is interesting. Like 3 Gears isn't interesting if people thought that, like, if people understood it.
I think
right?
3 Gears is interesting because of the 3rd gear. Right, like that's actually I think what makes it interesting. Like I had this phenomenon that I couldn't explain very well, where like I understood how to play this, and I watch other people play, and they're just they're just the classic. I did 17, and they're like, oh, this deck sucks. I did 17. I'm like, well, you didn't play right. And
I think it's interesting because of Gear 2. I think it's interesting that you think it's interesting because of Gear 3. But I think it's interesting because the first thing that people like think when they pick up the red deck is I need to kill my opponent. They don't think I can win if I just stop my opponent from killing me. They still don't think that, right? Like they still don't think that with regards to Goblins versus Burn, because they just don't see it, and then they just like try to kill their opponent, and that doesn't work. And then they try to like stop their opponent from killing them, and that doesn't work. And then they just try to like
Premodern Burn has Grim Lavamancer, and the caveat to that is that a lot of decks in Premodern have creature removal. Right, I think like my conception of like the height of the modern Burn deck is when Modern Burn had Grim Lavamancer. I think I usually played like 2+1.
Yeah, but you used it as an example for Gear 2 against the Humans deck.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't have creature removal. Like that's the thing. Like this Grim Lavamancer is going to rule the schoolyard. Yeah. Right, like nice Merfolk deck.
Yeah,
right? Like it doesn't matter how many 2/2s for 2 you're going to play. They're all dead.
Yeah, you're pretty psyched to get that guy. Path to Exiled as well.
Yeah, so like the thing about Gear 2 is, I think talking about that Humans example, when I had made that top 8 of that Modern Championship, I'd beaten the guy who had won the big Star City tournament the week before with humans, and like we were playing for top 8, so we drew a crowd and everything. This kid came up to me, he's like, "I've never seen anyone play like that," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because I just didn't attack with my Goblin Guide for like 6 turns, just sat there, like he's just like, "I just never saw anybody play like that," and I was just like, "But how else would you play?"
So right? You just lose. That's the point. That's exactly my point. It's just that people pick up the red deck. They pick up goblins. Like a lot of these like quote unquote beatdown decks. Like there's a huge difference, right, between like a white weenie deck, like a prototypical white weenie deck, and burn or goblins in that regard, because the white weenie deck really does just be like, okay, I can attack with my like Sultaris because they can't block. So like you don't have a lot of decisions. You play the creatures in your hand or you don't, because you're going to get wrathed. And if some of your creatures are Sultaris, you just get in, and then sometimes you have Armageddon. And then things get interesting, maybe you've got like Exalted Angel or whatever. But for the most part, like people kind of start from that concept of like green or white or green red or white like creature beatdown decks, and then they try to apply this to decks like Goblins and Burn that have like a lot more nuance and have a lot more like sort of transformative game plans. But the point I was trying to make is that the Rock isn't a mid-range deck because it doesn't have it doesn't have beatdown. Like it doesn't have kill your opponent. And I actually think that that's like pretty. Like,
so you're saying it's just a terrible control deck?
It's just a horrible control deck.
It's just like control. It's control like most of the time, but it's control in a misassignment of game loss.
Misassignment of roles.
Equals game loss situation. Wow.
But it just can't beat down. Like you just think about. Like that's why Call the Herd is so good in the Rock, right? Because it's like it blocks and attacks.
I'm trying to think like when I played the Rock, right? So the Rock was not a known quantity when I went on the Goldberg streak, and like Mikey P had never seen the deck before.
Right.
When I beat him,
it's a different time. Yeah.
When I beat him to win the Grand Prix trial, and then he won the Grand Prix with it after we worked together on it. So when I played it, I think it was like I used to call these gap decks, and like Mark Herberholz is like the master of gap deck design, which is like if you think of like the metagame as like a brick wall, right? These are the decks that slip between the bricks, and then like they have like all this value, right? Like where I just have a spike feeder, and because I have a spike feeder, you need to tricks me twice, and that's annoying,
right?
Or like like I have an Emerald Charm, and you didn't think like to play around the Emerald Charm.
Yeah.
Now your tricks combo might kill you. Or like like I beat this Dumbo drop deck in the PTQ that I won, where I cast Vampiric Tutor. Just like I'm just going to counterspell whatever you get.
You got the Dust Bowl.
The Dust Bowl, right?
So,
it took all of his blue. Like I just had these angles that just line up really well when I know what every card in my opponent's deck is,
right,
and they don't necessarily know what cards in my deck.
Well, you're describing a situation in which the Rock gets to like do things, right? It's like pre-modern the Rock. Like
the Rock can do all these. I mean, it doesn't have Vampiric Tutor, but it can do all these things. It can Dust Bowl. It can destroy.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really. The big reason is because the threats that are being presented to pre-modern the Rock is much different than the threat. Like for the like top dog combo control deck to be Tricks instead of Dreadnought or Replenish. Like that's a huge difference, right? You can't beat Replenish with Emerald Charm. Like, so you're gonna need to dig a little deeper into the BG card pool for that. And also the Rock has atrocious mana, and every other deck in pre-modern
good against Dreadnought.
I mean,
I
don't think that's true. Like, I think it looks like it's true, and then you like play the matches, and then you're just like, oh well, my opponent.
I mean,
like,
Iron Man versus the Hulk, fine. Okay.
No, but it happened again, right? It happened with Mike Arnold versus Tom in the PSS win-in match. It happened in our testing where we had Rich Shea's, or I don't know if we were using Rich Shea's list or just one of my stupid lists, but we were helping Tom test the Rock, remember? And you just like spectated, and you were watching Tom's POV, and you were just like, nice, we got this. And then I was like, cast deep analysis, and you're like, we don't have this. Like, we just don't have this.
The fact that the rock just folds to commonly played card drawing spells is like
the Storm deck was just like, I just cast Fact or Fiction, meditate, like just anytime, like accumulated knowledge. It was just
remember at like LC 2022 when I was just like, no, what you don't understand is you can't beat a Thawing Glaciers, right? Like you just have to plot this out, right? Like, how are you going to beat this Thawing Glaciers? This Thawing Glaciers undoes all your duresses.
Right.
And they're like,
so
no, that's lands. These are spells. I'm like, these are cards.
So this is
my deck has Replenish.
So this is where it comes full circle, which is just that, like, okay. So what you're saying is that the rock can't be controlled. It can't outgrind. It can't stop your opponent from drawing a bunch of cards and killing you. So you have to kill your opponent. And then you're like, okay, time to kill my opponent. Let's go. It's like 2 mana, activate Treetop Village, like get in for 3. Just like do that like 7 times in a row. Like, I'm pretty sure that the rock's like win column is just entirely fueled by like being like relatively good at mana flooding your opponent. Because like you can win if your opponent floods, right? So you just like, oh, first turn duress, and they're like, oh shoot, you got my first Fact or Fiction. Just need to wait till I draw the next one. And then sometimes they just don't draw the next one. And
before you get them with
Treetop. Yeah, exactly. Well, elephants, elephants were barely in the deck. The first edition of Lanny Rock didn't have Call the Herd, right? It had Rager, which has 1 less power, and the card it draws is much worse than a Hill Giant. So the rock is just like, it's just interesting because it's kind of like, to me, like, I would have to like think about other mid-range decks and other formats, but the rock's descendant, Modern Jund, was much different, right? Because Jund had Bloodbraid Elf and it had Lightning Bolt and it had Dark Confidant, so it just attacked. Like, it was a serviceable beatdown deck. That had a bunch of these tools to like just deal damage efficiently. It had Tarmogoyf. So I can't believe I didn't remember to say that, right? It's like pre-modern the rock, the closest thing that you have to Tarmogoyf is Call the Herd, which comes down a turn later and has 2 fewer power. It's like it has 3 times the cost for the power to toughness ratio. So the rock in pre-modern is just a bad black-green control deck. Because it's just like, and there's like other tension too. It's just like, okay, so like, I mean, it just is a control deck, right? So it's just like, I got duress that takes care of instants and sorceries and artifacts and enchantments, non-creature, non-lands, right? And I also have Pernicious Deed, and that takes care of creatures and artifacts and enchantments. And I also have Pernicious Deed is really slow, so I also have Vendetta, etc. And I also have Wall of Blossoms, and I also like, if we just put the rock spells into like offense versus defense columns, you have like 40 spells on whatever out of the non-land spells. You have like 20 that are on defense.
Is Baloth an offensive card?
I mean, it's not a good one, right?
Is Crows and Tusker an offensive card?
Yeah, still no. Keep going.
So what are the offensive cards? Call of the Herd?
Call the Herd, which wasn't always in the deck, and Blastoderm. Like, the rock before was just a control deck that's WinCon was like Blastoderm instead of Morphling.
And then you also have like Haunting Echoes as an offensive card.
It's a sideboard card.
Yeah. Your notion of the rock is really enlightening. I found this to be a great.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. But like, just think about other. I mean, and that was like the same thing, which was that. So it was funny because I actually was saying before, like, my joke is Landstill is the rock, but it's actually the other way around. The rock is Landstill. Like, the rock is just basically a slightly leaner version of Landstill. It's like a version of Landstill that just plays creatures, right? Instead of like, it just plays creatures, and instead of card draw, it plays discard, and just like, it has a bunch of like other stuff, but they're basically the same deck because they do the same thing. Like, it was happening to me over and over again. Or I was playing as the rock and playing as Landstill, and they would just like run out of stuff. The rock runs out much faster, right? But like, they would just like run out of stuff, and I would eventually win because I had like whatever. I've told the story a million times on the podcast that like, zombies defeated Landstill just because in your PSS, just because land still, just like had 5 cards in hand, but not the last removal spell for the last zombie. And so these decks are kind of always on the defense. And then people, I had a broadcast with Michael Hoyp, and we were commenting on the Grotog deck, and he was just like, well, Grotog is just your rock, right? And it's like, it's just the rock for you. Like, you,
I don't know. He's commenting from the perspective of, we make fun of Hoyp for being a rock player. And
no, he's saying it's player. Like you've deluded yourself into thinking that Grotog has quote unquote game in every matchup, right? It's like it's always has a shot.
I think that it does.
Well, it does.
I think Grotog is a pretty underrated deck.
It does, but anyways, his shtick was just like, as much copium as I'm huffing about the rock, like you just huff the same amount of copium for Grotog. And granted, this was a little while ago, before I kind of started really working the deck and massaging it a little bit more. But I was just like, Hoyp, I know your expectation is for me to be like, no, that's not true. But my answer is like, that is absolutely true. This is absolutely the rock. And it led me down this path because if you've been following along, I started adding increasingly more the rock / landstill type cards to my Grotog deck. So I added First I added plowshares, right? And that was like making my deck more like landstill. And then I added Call of the Herd. It's like, that's making my deck more like the rock. And then I added accumulated knowledge, which made my deck even more like landstill. And I've actually gone so far down this path, which I like look at my deck now and I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I am no longer the beatdown. I was just like, what deck am I the beatdown against? Just like nothing. Just like nothing. There's no deck that I'm the beatdown against, except for like Oath, and like even then, just like barely. Like my game plan against Oath is still like Sideboard and Ray of Revelation, right? Like I'm always.
What is your game plan against the card Oath of Druids in game 1? It's pretty bad, right? You need to get.
I just told you I added 1 Ray of Revelation to my deck.
No, like historically
it was to play Meddling Mage naming Oath of Druids, or Psychotog followed by a couple well placed ice.
How does that work out for you?
It's always lose.
Yeah.
I've never beat a resolved Oath of the Druids in game 1 on Grotog. But now I added 1 Ray of Revelation. So now I have a plan.
Okay.
But yeah, I scooped to remember when I played against Lan in our game 1, he was just like Opalescence, and I was like, GG. It's like, I can't beat Opal Wave. Just have to wait. Just need to have a counter in my hand. But just think about what's happened, right? Like I used to say, you can't run Plowshares, you can't run Disenchant effects. Like you need every single card in your deck to be gas.
You wanted your deck to be
beatdown,
offensive.
Yeah, I wanted to be beatdown, and then now I'm just like, that Oath of Druids resolves. I'll just find my revelation and deal with it later.
If you think about your personal history with Grotog, right? When we were having those exchanges on Twitter, right? Like before you were really in the community and you were just like opining on some of your ideas, like Premodern was far less defined than it is right now. And so you're just like, here's ideas that I have of cards that I think would generate leverage or be very powerful, right? And, the sum of those ends up being Grotog. And you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And it's like, I don't know.
I just sent you a list of every blue spell. I DM'd you and I said, you're telling me that I can play a deck that has Gush, Deep Analysis, Accumulated Knowledge, like Careful Study, because you're drawing so many cards, you might as well just play Careful Study.
You won that first big tournament, that Queen's tournament with Grotog, right? So, because it kind of validated a lot of the cards that you thought were good, but then I think like you're just in the situation where answers are increasingly good in formats the more defined they are, right? Like if a format's completely it's possible for there to be a tournament where Swords to Plowshares is just bad, right?
Right.
It's like not very likely, right? But like, what if everybody in the room is Replenish?
I mean, it might have been bad at Lobster Con last year because Parfait was in the metagame. So the metagame included Parfait. So decks that Swords to Plowshares is bad against, like this is amorphous, right? Because like what's the percentage, and it's going to matter how good your deck is into all those other decks. But Swords to Plowshares is bad against Replenish and Parfait. Those are two important decks in the metagame. Obviously, Replenish is much more bigger now. It's not good against. It wasn't good against like the other Oath decks that were kicking around. It's not good against Enchantress. It's not good against Stasis. It's not good against Monoblue Tide. It's not good against Landstill. Like,
it's pretty good against Landstill.
You keep saying that. Can you unpack that one for me?
Get their Mistress Factory. Get their Fairy Conclave.
Okay, but why is that good?
Just take out their... Because you're playing control deck. Taking out a land is good.
But that land is like not ever activated unless it's in surplus.
And they're like committing in the main phase. It's like... it's not great, right? Don't get me wrong. It's not great, but it's like... It's okay.
Do you sideboard them out?
It depends on my deck and how much garbage I can
You probably sideboard them out. Anyways.
Maybe. I need Teferi's Response Room.
Okay. Yeah. You gotta get...
I need to get like 2 main deck Teferi's Response, 3 sideboard Teferi's Response.
Right.
Just get up to the...
unpack for me a little bit about answers being good in a set metagame.
Well, the more defined the... So that's just what I was saying about Swords of Pleasure. It's like, if you don't know like at all, like the metagame's like totally like random or amorphous or something, or like, the decks that are being played are like Stasis, Rifter, like,
sure.
I'm just like,
Plow Your Eternal Dragon is pretty good.
It's okay, but like you're probably...
How is Plow Eternal Dragon okay and Plow Mistress Factory good?
They might have already drawn like 6 cards with that Eternal Dragon at the point that you're plowing it. That's why. And that you're going to lose to like the Lightning Rift or something instead.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
So, so you're just like Rifter, Stasis, Monoblue Tide. Like these are the decks that I guess Plow is okay against Monoblue Tide, but maybe
because they have Mistress Factory.
Yeah, maybe you don't have any white mana at the point that they're attacking.
What if their entire plan is to wait for you to plow their Mistress Factory and then they Teferi's Response you?
A lot of things can happen in a lot of games. So, but my point is, like, it's possible for Swords of Pleasures to not be that good, right? If like everybody's Enchantress, everybody's these kinds of like, what if they're playing Oath decks with like Shard Phoenix rather than Oath decks with Terravor? All these sorts of things can.
I mean, even Plowshares, your Terravor that you got for free is like, and they gained 20 is like not. You're not gonna win.
It's not
like
not great.
Glad you have it, but
yeah, these are these are examples of when Swords of Pleasures might not be that good. And you said, look at Lobster Con last year, maybe Swords of Pleasures wasn't. It's certainly not as good as it probably is.
I think we need to get away from the Swords of Plowshares example because Swords of Plowshares is too good, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people like to say that their Landstill deck is better into narrow metagames because they're like, oh, I know exactly what's coming to the store today, so I'm gonna play. Nobody knows. You're like, I'm gonna play my Teferi's Response main, and I'm gonna play my Dismantling Blows, and this shit is gonna go off.
Lan has walked into a meetup, looked around, has had no Hydroblasts before. Versus in the Brooklyn metagame, like we had multiple red decks and goblin decks And by the way, Brooklyn is hopping. We had the second straight meetup
off 16 players.
16 players on a Thursday night. Go Sunny.
Yeah.
So
he stamped. This is just a monthly meetup, and he stamped like 5 sweet pre-modern staples. And it was awesome.
Yeah, so it's crazy because I think Manhattan only drew 5 this month. But
it was because it was the location is just a little bit rough. Like I looked at my commute, I was free that evening, and I was like, it's gonna take me an hour and a half to get there. It's faster for me to get to Philly. I might as well just go visit the guys in Worcester. I feel like, so.
Like I was just like I could have made it, and I was like, I don't know, man. This is far.
I mean, I guess I could have bullied you. Like we could have just like both gone, but it was rough, and then it was also like. It's hard to, roll up to the shop and like, it's just like, I don't know. It's too far. It's too far for like, it's like 2 to 3 hours of travel for 2 to 3 hours of pre-modern. It's just not worth it. It's like really rough.
So anyway, so you really just don't know. Especially, I guess there's some people like who always play the same deck.
Yeah.
But
that's why I think it's like this is what you said was like control, like this concept, and Fran has said this too, and the concept is control decks are better when you know what to expect, right? Because you're like roll up
cards I think are better.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what makes the question interesting. It's just like so Like, so then you got to roll up and like decide to leave your blast at home, decide to leave your Phyrexian Furnace at home. I think like the crux of this is just that like people who play land still have to decide between Teferi's Response, Phyrexian Furnace, Dismantling Blow, or, you know, if you're sane, Seal of Cleansing. They have to decide if they're going to play 1 or 2 Humilities main deck. They have to decide how much Circle Red is in their sideboard versus Blasts, or, you know, whatever nonsense. They have like all these cards that are aces, but in like starkly different matchups. And then they're just like, if only I knew, like, if only I knew that the metagame was going to be these 3 decks, like, you know, then I'd be in business. And I think, like, I don't know, that it's, as I say it out loud, that just feels like copium. That's just like I don't know, it just like seems.
No, I'm just saying, I don't know how that's copium. I'm just saying this is just an observation. Okay, how about this? Okay,
well, I'm not saying it to be critical of you. I'm just trying to say, like, what is the, like, does this concept actually work? Because think about it another way, right? Like, the reason I put Ray of Revelation, 1 copy of Ray of Revelation in my Grotog deck is not because I expect to cast Ray of Revelation. It's because my deck loses to Opal Wave and Oath of Druids. So I just need that in there, right?
So,
but if you're putting Phyrexian Furnace in, and you're just like, oh dang, I wish that this was my standstill list has 2 Kurtar's Desire. If you're like, oh dang, I wish that this was more Kurtar's Desire, then you've made like a fatal error, because then you'll go up against Survival of the Fittest.
How many Wrath of God do you have?
I don't know, 2 or 3. It's normal amount.
But Kurtar's Desire? Why? Because that's good against the Terravore?
Because this is like another thing that I was thinking about. So Goblins versus Burn, you're basically playing like the Burn deck becomes a deck with 20 copies of Swords of Plowshares, right? So I asked in our Facebook group, I was like, how many copies of Swords of Plowshares would you play in your deck if you could play any amount? And Sunny was like, I would play like 6 or whatever in Landstill, or like 8 in Landstill, and I would never lose. And I'm like, well, you get Kurtar's Desire. It's like Kurtar's Desire is just the chain lightning of you know, Swords of Plowshares Lightning Bolt. Like, I'm not saying I like broken it. Like, people know about Kurtar's Desire, but I don't think I've ever seen
Green White Oath last year.
Yeah, it was like a good idea until it wasn't, because it was just like, okay, I have a 2020 Terravore, and then I just like wait until I have a Disenchant, and now I have a 2020 Terravore with haste. But and the superior card is Wax Wayne, right? And Wax Wayne answers opposing Terravore and Kurtar's Desire in the same card. But
I like the Wax Wayne.
Yeah, Wax Wayne's hilarious. But anyways, I was, you know, I just don't see it in like Landstill decks, and I'm just like the Swords to Plowshares card is just like insane. Just play bad Swords to Plowshares, because there really isn't anything else. It's not like there's an Incinerate, right? There's not like 2 mana Swords to Plowshares. There's not Terminate for Landstill. Just play Kurtar's Desire, because like you're playing a Landstill deck, and you're just like, okay, well, I gotta stop creatures. It's like, this is the number one thing, right? Like, the rest, I'll figure it out, because the game's going to last a while. But, like, the only thing that that is going to stop the game from lasting a while is, like, you know, Jackal Pup. So.
All right. So, you want to talk about this Ponza deck?
No, I still want to finish. I want to close the loop on mid-range.
All right. Mid-range, sometimes. So, what is a good example of a mid-range deck, if not the Rock?
Burn.
Burn?
Let's think about it.
So
the Ponza Oath deck, I think, is like, the Ponza Oath deck is weird because, like, okay, I hate Prison, right? Because there's no good definition of Prison.
It just fails sometimes.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
It is never control, right? So you think about it as being controls because you imagine Oath is a control card, but it's not. Oath is just a tripwire. Like, either your opponent screws up into your Oath or you don't get the Oath. Like, that's the binary in the red green.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It might as well. Like, you could reword Oath to just say, like, yeah, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like when you're playing like Turbo Upheaval, right? The Oath of the Druids can get Ancestors Chosen or Shard Phoenix, and like those are both disasters depending on what the opponent's deck is. And obviously you're a Guy's Blessing deck, so it's also feeding recursion at the same time. Like, that is a very different experience than like somebody like when you have a tripwire on the Oath of Druids for a Terravore deck, that's just like 15 time walks. Like that's actually what happened, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you drew a card and you got a bunch of time walks, but like it's not, you're not controlling anything. Like you're just trying to blow up your opponent's lands, and then sometimes
that's why I think it's an interesting thing, because going after your opponent's lands is like both a gear 1 and gear 2 play. It's if you just went nuts and bolts, it's a gear 2 play, right? You're stopping your opponent because you're not killing them with it.
It's very now. I don't know if you know from like the original schools of Magic, where there was a Handelman school, which is like, I think Jusum Jins and Hypnotic Specters, but like the concept of the Handelman deck was offensive overload. I think that like, and the Hypnotic Spectre was considered just, you know, a very, very powerful offensive card in the era, for type 1, right? And you're contrasting this with decks like the deck, where you're playing cards like Moat or the Abyss, right? So like it's like, you know, Hypnotic Spectre versus the Abyss, Hypnotic Spectre versus Moat, right? One of these is going to work out a lot better for the deck than the other one, right? But I think that the Oath Ponza deck is just an offensive overload deck. And what it does is it doesn't necessarily, it's not just offensive in terms of attacking the opponent's life total. It just makes their life miserable. It's not a prison deck, right? Like you're not, I don't understand, like a prison deck is like controlling elements and then it's trying to get somewhere. Right? This is just like, I'm just going to randomly play a first turn Sphere of Resistance and hope this makes your life difficult.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does. But the problem is sometimes it doesn't. Right, so like the thing.
Well, sometimes your opponent just draws lands.
Yeah, or like that's why like I hate the red deck matchup so much. Like I mean, I played against literally a first-time Commander player at a Brooklyn meetup 2 meetups ago, and he spanked me and did not understand how the matchup worked at all.
And just because they drew enough lands. I mean, I've experienced that too.
Yeah, so so that's the thing. Like, so if you think about like the Rock being a deck that's always control, but like it fails the misassignment of roll equals game loss trigger, that's Oath Ponza. Oath Ponza is always the beatdown. It's just sometimes the beatdown looks spectacular, and sometimes it's just like okay, you know these games where you're mana flooded because your deck has like 32 mana sources. It's like you didn't draw a Sylvan Library. It's like turn 14, you're peeling a Mox Diamond that you play just to discard a land out of your hand to maybe make the next Terravore bigger, and then say go. Like you lose those games a lot, and that's the same as a red deck who drew too many lands.
Right. But that's what makes it interesting. So what you're doing is that you're applying a layer of interpretation onto like the most basic, question underlying, which is just like, this is a deck that has 8 Stone Rains, 4 Sphere of Resistance, 4 Wasteland, 4 Port, 2 Naturalized, 2 Pyroclasts, and 4 Oath of Druids. All of these cards, the text on them is stop your opponent from killing you. None of them kill your opponent. The fact that they work in concert to virtually kill your opponent doesn't really change the fact, because the rest of the deck is Sylvan Library, which is neither here nor there. Like card draw spells are just like look at more
deep analysis.
Look at more of my stuff. Terravore, which actually kills your opponent. 8-man lands, which actually kill your opponent. And then I literally named the entire deck list. What am I missing? Like just what? Just nothing. That's the whole deck. So Mox Diamond, right? So I would say this, like, what you've done by talking about the deck you're talking about it in sort of a strategic sense. You're just like, okay, well, the deck strategy is this kind of like overload strategy, or it's like whatever. But what I'm saying is that, like, what if we made it as objective as possible and just be like, what's a mid-range deck? It's like, well, a mid-range deck has a good percentage, a relatively balanced percentage of cards that are designed to kill your opponent and cards that are designed to stop your opponent from killing you. Then it becomes super interesting. And that's why Burn is really interesting, because Lightning Bolt is one of the very, very few cards that has both of those modes on it. And then Burn is all Lightning Bolts. So then Burn just becomes a bunch of Gear 1-2 split cards. It's why Burn is a great example for the gears, right? Because the deck with Swords of Plowshares in it is just like more like when it draws Swords of Plowshares.
That's always the gear.
Yeah, it's like, well, I'm in Gear 2. And so the Grotog deck, and Call the Herd has, like, Tarmogoyf is like also a good example, because Tarmogoyf effectively, creatures add a lot of texture to this, right? Because a creature like Tarmogoyf is designed for both attacking and blocking, and Call the Herd similarly functions, whereas like Goblin Lackey and Siltari Cleric have one job, right? Like Goblin Pile Driver has one job, Goblin War Chief has one job, right? No, you're not blocking with these guys, but
Siltari Priest really just never.
Yeah, they're just really, yeah. So, but just look at the deck list, and this is, you know, homework if you're listening. Go pull out your favorite deck and head over to the Spike Colony Facebook and tell me whether or not it's a Gear 1 deck, a Gear 2 deck, if it's a mid-range deck. You know, use this analysis on your deck. We could probably go down the list, because at the end of the day, like I don't know, I'm really loving this analysis framework because it's just super interesting, and it can help. I think it helps with some sort of like. It helps with your like role assignment when you're like looking at matchups. Like I think that a lot of times you kind of don't see the forest for the trees or the other way around, where you're like, oh, is this deck good against this deck? And a lot of times people are just like, well, my deck has, you know, these cards and it's good against these cards in the opponent's deck. But I think a lot of times you'll like miss something. Like I missed something when I added Dreadnought. I knew why. Like I in my head, I knew why Dreadnought wouldn't work in Grotog, but like I had to try it, right? Because I was just like, okay, well, what happens if I just draw a lot of Stifle, Vision Charm, and not a lot else? Like this is a deck that doesn't really want to be holding 3 cards waiting to draw Dreadnought, and it doesn't have like Impulse. It doesn't have these like powerful tools for finding Dreadnought outside of Portent and Gush, which is not a good Dreadnought Finder card. And that's exactly what happened. I just played a lot of games where I was just like sitting there and it went pass because my hand was Vision Charm.
It's a great point. I played Dreadnought this week. I only played Dreadnought because you and Sonny both wanted to play against the Gauntlet. So I'm like, what's the Gauntlet? So I bring 3 decks, Burn,
Dreadnought Goblins.
Dreadnought and Goblins. And so I'm like, oh, let's play Dreadnought. I haven't played it in a while. I had no problems assembling my combo. I went 3-1, and I lost that epic match to Bill where I actually, got through the.
You got one attack in, yeah.
He just like he had no cards in hand. He just had, whatever. If people pull to stay alive, right? That's a classic dilemma in Magic the Gathering. But I had no problems assembling my Dreadnought combo, and I played no impulses. I played Opt, and
you played 0 copies of Impulse?
0 copies of it. But I also played no Brain Freezes. If I played Brain Freeze, maybe I would have played.
Probably would have beat Bill if you had Impulse, just saying.
Why?
Because you would have
I got this stuff. I literally
you would have had your stuff a turn earlier.
I created the my Impulse would have cost like 4 mana and it's terrible.
Then your Impulse would have helped you find a land.
I had land. I needed to put together. I needed to get through.
If you had land, then you can cast Impulse. Okay. Is your deck beat down? Is it control? What deck is true mid range? Let's apply that to Grotog. Grotog has like 16 cards that draw cards, and then so the remaining cards are 10 creatures, 4 counterspells, or 6 counterspells if you include foil, plowshares, and then you can ask questions about like what kind of what gear is Days? Is Days Gear 1 or Gear 2? I guess if you just look at the text of the card, it's Gear 2, but it only is good in Gear 1 decks, right?
I wrote an article recently about how to play counterspells, and like that there's like I think I said there's 3 different sorts of ways that you would play counterspells, and that like the card counterspell's pretty good at all of them.
Yeah.
That's why it's like emblematic. But like, like there's counterspells that protect your thing, right? So,
well,
Brian Kibler taught me this, which is like Force of Will is good because it protects. I do my thing and I'm tapped out now and I'm protecting it for a turn, and that's why it's good.
But Brian Kibler had to teach you that.
He taught me that a long time ago, right?
I wasn't there, but I have to imagine people figured Force of Will out pretty quickly.
So,
don't tell me people they printed Force of Will and it still took some time for people to be like. It should just be Alan Comer, right? Or like I don't know who.
Force of Will was not nearly as widely played as you imagine it.
Was it in Turbo Xerox?
It was not in Turbo Xerox.
Was it legal to play in Turbo Xerox? I wasn't there, so I don't really know what decks it was in.
I don't think it was legal to play. Maybe it was in Turbo Xerox. I don't think it was. Actually, maybe it must.
You understand how insane it is to be like, Brian Kibler explained to me that you could tap out and then cast Force Will, right?
I mean, this was like 2001, like not even 1997 that he explained this to me. So it's like 4 years after it had rotated out of standard.
That is also very funny. My first format was Type 1-5, and so like I rolled up to the game shop and like my opponent cast Force of Will, and I was just like, interesting. Just like
people were unclear about Force of Will being good because it was card disadvantage. You have to remember the threats were much slower back then. Like the strength of Force of Will in its early deck was in Turbo Stasis, and that was largely because Howling Mine kept you at the amount of cards that would make your ability to protect your stasis combo good. It was a different era. Lanny Huang. So
Force of Will was in Janosch's deck. It was in Janosch Kuhn's. No, it was in the Abans deck.
I'm just saying.
And that deck barely has any blue cards.
I'm just saying to you, Force of Will was a lot less frequently played than you're probably imagining.
My response to that is mind blown. My mind is blown.
It is. I'm telling you, there were a lot of 3 Force of Wills. There were a lot of 0 Force of Wills.
All right, paging the boomers. Please back Mike up here, because right now he sounds like old man yelling at cloud.
I'm not evincing an opinion. I'm telling you what the deck lists look like.
I'm just telling you that if a bunch of boomers chime in on Facebook when this podcast is released, or on Discord, or they DM me and they're just like, bro, Mike is right. You young guys have no idea. Force of Will was not the shit. I will believe you. Right now, I don't believe you. That's all I'm saying. I just don't believe you. You could be right. It just sounds insane. You have to understand why that sounds crazy to me, right?
I almost want to go down the rabbit hole and find Andrew Cunio's.
Just like find some three.
No, like find Andrew Cunio's deck he beat me with. He won a PTQ in 1990.
And he invented Draw Go, right?
7. He did. So he beat me in a PTQ. He won the PTQ. So it was it. So I.
How much Force of Will was in Tricks?
4, but that was years later. Force of Will was printed in 1997, and Tricks was like 2001.
Oh, because why did Tricks take so long to come around? Because Donate?
Because Donate wasn't printed until years later.
Okay.
So that was a 4, but also Tricks was an extended deck.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So Force of Will starts out in standard. It's like the way that cards should be. It starts out in standard and then graduates to bigger formats.
I can't believe I have no idea what you're referencing about how it should be. Isn't that how Magic works?
It's not just a card that they're just like, oh, here are big formats. Let's just print cards into them and not know how they work.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I've only ever played cards that were legal in standard. What could possibly
or like the head designer is just
how could that possibly go wrong?
Some people seem to not like that we just printed these cards into these formats and then the format is radically different than it was last week. Right? Like, and that all of these decks that you would have invested in over the course of time are now invalidated by cards that are mega more efficient and win the game on the 3rd turn.
All right. Anyway, so you're saying there's different kinds of counterspells, and counterspell is the best.
Well, counterspell just is good.
It's the most versatile.
It's good at all of the tasks, right? But there's like there are counterspells like Eugene Harvey was talking about like why my blue-red Urzatron deck that Osip made top 8 of Honolulu with was good. And he's just like, the reason it's good is because the counterspells are all tempo counterspells. So like, if you think about tempo counterspells as like counterspells that you cast that gain time, right? Like Remand is a really good example, which is not a pre-modern legal card. Force Spike is a pretty good example, right? Like this card loses a lot of value in the game when the game goes long, but like its job is to make the game go long, if that makes any sense. Because you're good in the games that go long, but you might get run over. So Force Spike is just horrible on turn 17, but you might not get turn 17 if you didn't Force Spike their Jackal Pup.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty relevant for the tide control discussion we had earlier.
Yeah, so there's tempo counterspells, there's protect my thing counterspells, and there's answer your thing counterspells. And answering your thing is usually pretty bad. And the reason that answering your thing is usually pretty bad is because most decks have
more than one thing.
Well, it's not just that. Like most decks have some cards that are good at answering your thing, right? So if you counterspell a creature in a deck that has Wrath of God and Swords to Plowshares, you're now like taking this counterspell that could have protected my thing, or or done one of its other functions, and instead of like using a Swords to Plowshares whose only function is to kill your thing, right? Or a disenchant if appropriate. So, but the thing about counterspell is it's great at all of the functions, right? If you think about like Remand or Mana Leak is also pretty good tempo counterspell. Like from a all of them can do more than one thing, right? In a sense, a Force Spike is a hard counter, right? In a sense, a Mana Leak is a hard counter. If your opponent can't pay 3, you just hard countered them. But like if you think about like Mana Leak being a 2 casting cost counterspell, or Remand being a 2 casting cost counterspell is also a 2 casting cost counterspell.
Yeah, exactly.
It does that thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the reason that you wouldn't do it sometimes is because it is so good at the other functions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the only counterspells played in modern day Legacy are Daze and Force of Will, right? And then they sideboard in Flusterstorms and the new Consigned to Memory and whatever. And in Vintage you have Mental Misstep, right? But like, it's interesting because counterspell is very seldom played in Legacy. Like some dirtly, like the 8 Brainstorm, like Miracles plays counterspell, but like most decks don't because nobody spends mana for their spells. So you're never getting paid. It's never a tempo counterspell, right? Like counterspell for 2 against your opponents. The best that you're gonna get is a Murktide Regent, right? You're never gonna otherwise. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you're getting like counter Swords to Plowshare. Like I don't even know. I can't even name Legacy spells. You can't counterspell Urza's Saga, so it's just like I don't know. Maybe you'll counter some Fat Eldrazi. Maybe you'll counter Blood Moon. I have no idea.
But if you're countering an Eldrazi, doesn't it have a cast trigger that's gonna?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway. Right. Okay.
Like, you countered me, I get another turn.
That's neither here nor there. It's interesting because, like, I'm just like thinking about all the times that I'm thinking about the last. I should look at my own videos. Just think about all the times I'm playing my Grog deck, and I think that I'm doing anything other than just being a control deck. And just think about everything I've said. Like, well, you lose a lot of game 1s and then you sideboard and then you win game 2 and 3. It's like, oh, well, you play. The goal is to block or or find just play a bunch of Rare Revelations. Like sometimes Armageddon. Like Armageddon's not it's a beatdown card, but the text of it is stop your opponent.
So I actually want to think about this. So I think that there's 4 categories in next level deck building, which are like control decks, mid-range decks, beatdown decks, and combo decks. And I think that Aggro-control is a mid-range deck, if memory serves.
Yeah. I mean, but that's because mid-range is too large of a bucket. It's like a weird bucket.
And I would, well, yeah, but there's like the 4 decks in that section, I believe, are pure mid-range, which is like the Red Zone is pure mid-range. Do you know the deck, the Red Zone?
Probably.
It's like a Brian Kibler deck, or like Naya.
Yeah.
Right, like here's a 3 casting cost creature that has like some interesting abilities, right?
But all of offensive, right?
Yeah, like get you with Treetop Village, right? Naya.
Shadow.
Right? Like so like that would be or like the Red Zone itself, like he's got like Ancient Hydra, Sabo's Decree, Armageddon, Jade Leech, right? Like this is like the rock with no discard spells, right? Like but it has flexible game. Rith the Awakener with Armadillo Cloak on it. That's a pretty modern legal combo.
Let's go. Pre-modern legal, yeah.
Yeah, so
it's actually illegal in both formats, I believe.
So like there's pure mid range, and there's the rock, obviously, Aggro-control, and I can't remember what the other one is. I don't want to say Suicide Black. I think Suicide Black is a beatdown deck, but it might be I assume it's a beatdown.
Oh my god, Rith the Awakener is not modern legal. It hasn't been printed in any core set or any cool thing.
Well, so Armadillo Cloak's not legal, but I think the other one is the one that gives lifelink. Armadillo Cloak is better because if you have 2 of them, you can get 2 triggers.
Oh my god, you're right. It is not legal in modern. That's crazy.
Yeah, but there's a functional.
Yeah. There's a lifelink one. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also just ethereal armor and whatever aura nonsense. And what were you saying? the four quadrants.
Yeah. So but my argument is that Like my long-term argument is that aggro control is the best archetype. Like if you just like look at the long span of
right. If you've said that on the podcast before, that if there is an aggro control deck, it's the best deck.
Yeah, then Grotog and I think that I'm a little unclear. I guess 12/12 is combo control, but I think it behaves as aggro control sometimes.
It behaves like that, but I think that I hate it when people call it a tempo delver.
It's not. It's an aggro control deck. I'm sorry. It's either an aggro control deck or a.
I just don't think about it as an aggro control deck because like it really is a combo. The fact that it costs 2 mana and puts a creature in play is irrelevant, right? Like Reanimator is a combo deck. Like
the definition of aggro control. Or like not the definition, but like kind of the grouping of aggro control. If you think of like the aggro control decks over time, like Rising Waters, like free spell skies, Rising Waters, Counter Sliver, Delver,
Madness.
Could be Madness. I think probably Madness. Like the definition of those decks is that they were very good at establishing a clock and then protecting the queen fast in such a way that they would win the game. And that like the decks that those decks are usually bad against are decks like the Rock, right? That like I have so many like Vendetta or whatever, right? Like you can't protect this queen, and then you're gonna lose to a creature that's just better than the creatures in your deck. Versus they're great against decks like Landstill, right? Where like, all right, my guy got under your counter spells. And now it's my counterspells against your counterspells, and you don't have more counterspells than I do, right? And,
you don't have more mana than I do. Is the thing? It's like you don't have enough. Right? Yeah, you don't have. You can't cast Wrath of God, right? So you might have the same amount of counterspells, and it's Swords of Plowshares kind of breaks the paradigm. But obviously, I have Meddling Mage naming Swords of Plowshares. But yeah, like it's so interesting because I actually at that first pre-modern tournament I ever played. Actually, at the first games of pre-modern I played. The very first games of paper pre-modern I played my Grotog deck against Rich Shea's Psychotog deck, and we played on webcam, and had a good chat because so I won game 1, and I was just like, this is very interesting. I feel like I should never be able to win because you're basically a heavy control deck, and I'm this like aggro control deck, and my paradigm up until this point was just that control beats aggro control, because it's just like
no, aggro control beats control.
I mean, that's my paradigm mostly came from like like if you took I guess I don't know what the aggro control deck in modern was at the time, because it was like Phoenix, and blue-white control wasn't was good against Phoenix because it had Rest in Peace, but it was just kind of like
board control is often pretty good against aggro controls. Board control has more card advantage typically.
Yeah, but I mean the like in general, like if the deck could if you had a deck like, I mean, it's just like complicated, right? Because like I don't know enough about Legacy, but when I look at the Miracles deck and I look at the Delver decks, I'm just like, well, I think the Miracle deck should beat the Delver deck. I guess I don't know though. So
I mean, it depends on how lucky. Like, Hayne won the Pro Tour with Miracles, and John was like, "That's just a deck to get lucky with." Right? Like,
fair enough.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it has cards in it that literally say if this is the first card.
Yeah, like it comes up.
The
sometimes.
Deck's name is Miracles.
Like those cards are not great if you're casting them, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, that's obviously the point. Okay, so. And then I went on and I played. I beat Landstill twice with Grotog, and same kind of thing happened. And I was just like, okay, I guess it works. But the thing that got me was basically what you're pointing out, was just like the Rock, just instead of playing counter spells, just plays more of the same kinds of spells, which is like removal. And that's not always true, but that's can be functionally true. But Landstill just has Swords of Plowshares. And I think I would have lost those games to Landstill if they had Kurtar's Desire. But yeah, aggro control, like now everything's changed, right? So now if you look at pre-modern, I basically beat 2 beatdown decks, which were decks that I would have never beat with the old version of Grotog. And I actually beat them because I had accumulated knowledge. It was like the weirdest thing.
Yeah, so
like I used accumulated knowledge to beat 3 white weenie decks with my Grotog deck. I beat Rancor weenie, I beat Earthquake weenie, and I beat Counter Rebel. Or Rebel still.
Aggro-control is historically bad against beatdown, but the problem and the reason why I said that like aggro-control is the best is like sometimes it doesn't lose to beatdown. And like that's its bad matchup, you know? But you can imagine like there's these just historical decks that are just like the red deck or Stompy or something, just run over the poor aggro-control deck with their 2/2s for 2, trying to counterspell things. But
burn is I mean, I guess it's a good point that like how good counterspell is in this context is like pretty important. Counterspell your lightning bolt is the inverse of hydroblast your ball lightning. Like,
yeah. So, and the other thing that Chapin would differentiate in next level deck building is that fish and aggro control are two different things. And like, so people like group fish, you know, like Merfolk decks and stuff in with aggro control, but his argument is that those decks are much closer to Suicide Black than they are to aggro control.
I mean, they have more. I mean, they're just wider rather than taller, right? Which was like different when it was like Wild Mongrel Arrogant Worm versus like, well, Lord of Atlantis is like a card that literally just like completely changes the texture of everything. Because it's interesting because when you say fish, my instinct is actually to go back to the Type 1/5 fish decks. That was like the blue-red Grim Lavamancer Cloud of Fairies deck.
Yeah.
And Mirrodin was printed at this time, so there was like equipment. But do you think that a Grim Lavamancer Cloud of Fairies bolt, I don't know, GT deck is a aggro control deck or a fish deck? Because we called it fish.
Probably a fish deck if you called it fish. I mean, like, I don't know, like,
because you're saying that fish is like Suicide Black, and I get it in my bones, because like Lord of Atlantis specifically means that you're like a tribal aggro deck, and like the fact that you're blue means that you have days or whatever, right? But like I've never used fish to describe the Merfolk deck. I always thought that fish, like when Delver, like I took a break from Magic right between 2007 or 8 and 2018, and when I came back to Magic and I saw Delver of Secrets, I was just like, oh, this is like the fish deck, but they just call them Delver decks now. But Delver wouldn't be fish according to Chapin.
Delver is aggro control.
That's why I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird to me how decks play out. Like if you think, because I mean, I'm so hardwired to like playing a bunch of copies of cards in my deck, right? Like, you know, when I played Tom Metelsky's version of Landstill, which I was excited about prior to Lobster Con last year, like the deck just had like a bunch of 2 and 3 ofs, but and some of like 1 ofs. Like I think there was like one Chain of Vapor, you know, and then like Parallax.
That should have been a Kurtar's Desire.
All right, so like I was just like, well, it's just enough, right? Like I'm laying these things out and I'm just getting enough, and I just wasn't used to that because I'm like so used to. I was making fun. I'm like, you know, 2 is the wrong number of Swords to Plowshares. Yeah. Give me any of 1, 3, or 4, probably 4. But I'm just like, you know, hardwired to have like 4 copies of all these cards. And
I love that you hate 2. It's actually kind of funny.
I hate 2 of Swords to Plowshares in a deck with Intuition. Yeah, like just the worst number, right? Like I don't know what deck I've ever liked 2. Like I played. I don't know how many gnarled masses did I play?
I like 2 Armageddons. 2's a great number of Armageddon.
I always draw both of them.
That's great. First one gets countered sometimes.
So it's funny. I Sonny had to leave to go take care of his son. He came back in time for us to play our match. And I got that match. I was 12-12. Sonny was Tron. But in game 3, I think he won game 1. And then I think I got game 2. So in game 3, I literally gush Armageddon with Meddling Mage on Swords to Plowshares in play, and he was just like Tron piece, dual land. Look at the next floor. I'm like, I'm stone gonna lose this game. Like, he had the decree, but luckily I had a stifle. But I mean, can you imagine, right? Like I Armageddoned him for 2 of
I can imagine Armageddoning and
versus
still
4 of
losing.
his
I did
lands.
it multiple times at the $1,000 tournament against
a
Bill.
Tron with an empty board, right? Like, and I have a 2/2. So I got it though. I was just like, this is crazy, right? Like, he just had Tron. He like natural Tron recovery into a dual land.
I've been thinking recently that we could play fewer than 4 copies of Meddling Mage in some of our decks.
Wow, you're just on the 2 Swords to Plowshares copium, and you've spread it across.
Yeah,
other
I've
cards
just spread
you
it
want.
off. Yeah, I'll never run 2 Gush, right? But I was like looking. Oh yeah, Meddling Mage is bad against Oath, Burn, and Goblins.
It's okay against Burn.
It's not bad against. It's not horrible against Oath.
Damage.
Yeah, but I'm just saying for like a card, it being not good against Burn is important in a deck with a bunch of other cards that aren't good against Burn, because winning game 1 against Burn is very important.
Well, it depends what deck you are, right? Like, I think it's just
all of the Meddling Mage decks except for Dreadnought. Whereas
I was thinking Dreadnought.
Dreadnought still but Dreadnought would rather cast Impulse than Meddling Mage against Burn.
Well, what if you don't have Impulse because you don't like Impulse?
Well, maybe you should have Impulse. Maybe you should put the Meddling Mage in the
side
sideboard.
out Meddling Mage, side in Sabo's web. That's my equivalent.
That's a good conclusion. Meddling Mage is like pretty bad against Red Green Oath, except for when you name Oath before they cast Oath, and then they can't do anything about the Meddling Mage except for the two main deck Pyroclasm. But on the flip side, you just have a Meddling Mage naming Oath, and like you can't attack with it because they have 8 man lands to block. So you just kind of have this Meddling Mage. I think that's, and it's also really bad post board against Call the Herd, and more Pyroclasm. So you board out the Meddling Mage anyways, but I don't know.
To me, like Meddling Mage is bad, not that Meddling Mage is not to be a 4 of.
If
when Meddling Mage is good, you want to draw it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So so why do you have Meddling Mage? Like, Meddling Mage beats Swords of Plowshares. Like, why else do you have Meddling Mage? So Meddling Mage is pretty good against Replenish, but the problem is against Replenish, your first Meddling Mage still has to name Swords of Plowshares, and then you have to bring the other stuff, and you'll probably win because you'll have Mage on Plowshares, and then they have to spend 4 mana for everything, and you just like counter them one at a time, right? But sometimes they can just slip through the counters like Lanny.
And Meddling Mage
Rapid
on
God.
Chain of Vapor was pretty good for me.
I mean, it is super good against mono blue decks for sure. I mean, Meddling Mage on Chain of Vapor is just GG against Stasis. But and don't get me wrong, like the fact that some decks fold to Meddling Mage is a big reason to have Meddling Mage. Like, your only hope of beating the Rock on Grotog, not your only hope. I mean, you have a lot of hope because your opponent's playing the Rock. But one way to really leverage against the Rock is just play Meddling Mage naming Pernicious Steed. Like, that's big. And Swords of Plowshares is an important card. But I ran into this thing where I was just kind of like, well, I have Meddling Mage. That's meant to beat Swords of Plowshares. I'm like, but I also have Swords of Plowshares in my deck. And I also have Call the Herd in my deck now. And Call the Herd also beats Swords of Plowshares. So sometimes I'm going to Mage Plowshares and I'm going to have my own Plowshares. And that's not going to be good. Sometimes my opponent's not going to have Plowshares and I'm going to Mage something else. And that's probably like the best case scenario. And then sometimes if my opponent has Plowshares, it doesn't matter because I have Call the Herd. So in this spread of outcomes, all of a sudden, like, I don't know, like when I was making this 5-color Dreadnought deck, I was just like, oh, I solved all my problems. I get to play all the cards because I have 5 colors. But the problem is I had to cut card draw. So now I'm like looking back at my 5-color Dreadnought deck, and I'm just like, well, what should I cut for card draw? And I'm like, well, I have these Call the Herds. Like, why do I need Meddling Mage? Like, obviously Meddling Mage is to protect Dreadnought, but like, what if I'm playing a protect Dreadnought game?
Just then play 85 cards.
Then I can play Call the Herd. And if I
play 85 cards, you
and if I am not playing a Protect Dreadnought game, then I'm just winning with Dreadnought without protection.
The more I think about your 5-color Dreadnought Growatog combo deck, by combo I don't mean it like it's a combo deck. I mean just like a combo of different decks.
Yeah.
It just sounds awful to me, right? Like you have all the liabilities of Dreadnought, but like
you have none of the liabilities. You solved your liability with Call of the Herd.
No, but you don't like
what beats Dreadnought. Name what beats Dreadnought. Game 1.
What beats Dreadnought game 1?
Yeah.
A removal spell.
Call the Herd.
I mean, like, I'm just like, I don't imagine this is making your deck. So I think that black mid-range or black removal sort of decks are good against Dreadnought. Like,
But Call the Herd is good against black midrange, and so is Accumulated Knowledge.
You lost to a first-time player on the black-white control deck.
That's because I had Meddling Mage in my deck.
Okay, what I'm saying is, this does not compute to me. Like, you've inherited the liabilities of Dreadnought, which is like, I could be sitting around with a Stifle in my hand for a bunch of turns.
Yes.
But you don't get nearly enough of the speed, right? Like, I can't imagine you just re-added all of the dazes and foils to your deck.
But you don't need the dazes and foils game one against. Okay, just think like.
No, I'm just saying. I won a bunch by like.
I understand. I have played the Dreadnought deck, Mike. I understand the role of those cards. I'm just trying to rethink it. Okay, so what if instead of protecting your investment, right? Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket and trying to put that basket in a blast safe drawer, what if you just diversified your portfolio? That's what Meddling Mage did to the deck initially. Like, the idea was just like, well, I don't want to play a game where I only win by attacking with this one creature.
I have always disagreed with you and Fran about this. I always interpreted Meddling Mage in the Dreadnought deck as being your one-up against other Dreadnought decks. Like, that is the main thing that was great about it.
It's like a huge reason why you would beat Parfait, Replenish, like Oath of Druids in general. Combo decks that could conceivably race you, like combo decks with like any amount of resistance, right? So if like you're playing a theoretical, I mean, this would actually just happen, right? Where I was like playing against Monoblue Dreadnought again with Devour combo, and if my opponent didn't have Meddling Mage, I just waited until they played Dreadnought. I would throw 2 bounce spells at it. They would counter both bounce spells, and then I would combo, and they'd be out of counters for the combo. And like, Meddling Mage changes all of that. Like Storm, like you watched the Monoblue Storm matchup that I played against Nick in the PSS, and like the only reason like that matchup was the way that it was because of Meddling Mage, and the only reason I have 6 differently named bounce spells in my Storm list is because of Meddling Mage. Like, if like the Monoblue Dreadnought deck only has effectively one gear, which is kill your opponent, right? Because the stop. Okay. This is actually super relevant, right? So one thing we didn't talk about with gear 2 is just like, okay, well, you need to shit change gears, right? Stop your opponent needs to become kill your opponent at some point. And if you make that transition, you're like, okay, I'm done stopping my opponent. I'm done counterspelling their nonsense. I'm going to kill them now. And you change gears, and then your opponent's just like, okay, well, now I'm going to shift from my gear 1 to my gear 2, and I'm going to stop your Dreadnought. Then you're just like all out of stuff because your stuff was wasted on gear 2 stuff and staying alive. So don't get me wrong, like turn 2 Dreadnought Daze Foil backup, 1 sounds like a combo deck to me, but 2 is potent, but it is just like a 1 gear thing.
It's a combo control deck. It's like maybe it's not a combo control deck. Maybe it's just a combo deck.
I think it's just a combo deck. At least Monoblue is a combo deck, and then you can make arguments for the version with Meddling Mages having like a little bit more texture, but still fundamentally, like, yeah, if you're like Meddling Mages protects Dreadnought, then you're just talking about it like a combo deck. But I don't know how many games you have to watch Meddling Mage go coast to coast on a control or combo or whatever, like any opponent that doesn't have Call the Herd in their deck, right? Or idiots like Mishra's Factory. I mean, that's the thing, is like Meddling Mage stock keeps on going down because like Mishra's Factory stock is up, and Mishra's Factory is just like super good against Meddling Mage. You have to play Meddling Mage and Armadillo Cloak or Elephant Guide. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's like I think Meddling Mage is like super interesting, and I actually, before we got into all this, I was going to ask you if you think Meddling Mage is a gear 1 or a gear 2 card.
A gear 1 or a gear 2? I think it's a gear 1 card.
It's kind of both though, because it does stop your opponent. It is a rare both situation.
It shifts your opponent's values,
but it can do both at the same time. That's my point, right? So if you're playing against, I mean, you've experienced this. You're playing against elves, right? So you play Meddling Mage Naming Survival. Like, you just don't have to do anything. You're just
now I have a 2/2 and their entire deck is 1/1.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I've won a lot of games from
Or
this.
even better, like, if you're playing a deck with a Meddling Mage and your opponent is playing a Devourer combo, and you could put a Meddling Mage onto the battlefield naming Tinker, it's just like, it's just over, right? And like, that's kind of like...
Is that the card you name? I don't know. I might name Fling.
Well, then they kill you with Alter Dementia.
I don't know. I
You name the most mana efficient card, right? So that's why you name Plowshares instead of, whatever. You name. I mean, a good heuristic is to name the most mana efficient card and the removal card, right? That's why you name Chain of Vapor instead of Stasis. Well,
you name Chain of Vapor because if you name Stasis, they can just Chain of Vapor the Meddling Mage.
Yeah, exactly.
If they have 2 Chain of Vapors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that part is super interesting. I think that it's just interesting because, like, what kind of analysis? I mean, obviously you just need to play games, but like, it'd be interesting to think about what kind of analysis you need to, like, basically take this card, because Meddling Mage, for people who are like us and Fran, maybe you don't believe this, but we're pretty close to saying this is the best creature in the format, right? But it's interesting to think about how that context changes depending on the deck that you're playing, and if that context is just changing because of the metagame. Because like, there's so many matchups for Grotog, so many, where you don't want Meddling Mage that bad, but you also can't board it out for anything. And so you're kind of left with this 2/2 that if you sort of like engineer a good game state, like, it becomes this like weird second order answer, right? Because your opponent can take away the ability to have the threat.
Yeah, well, the thing that I was saying is just like Meddling Mage shifts your opponent's value system. And like basically the game could go from whatever your opponent would. It depends on their deck, right? Like you said, there's a lot of decks where the Meddling Mage isn't very good, right? But in decks that Meddling Mage has text, right? The deck goes from being about whatever they were wanted to be about to being now about Meddling Mage.
Yeah, especially if it's like naming Dreadnought. Yeah,
like if you name Dreadnought against Monoblue, like, it sounds like they're gonna die in 10 turns.
Yeah.
Like that's probably just gonna happen.
Just come with me here, like.
Right, but
the blue-white Dreadnought matchup against the card Meddling Mage, the plan is to board in Last Breath.
Because you can't rely on dealing with
exactly. So just cast Call of the Herd. Just go to town. Like, second order answer, right? Why don't you just play a first order threat? Why don't you just play a threat instead of a...
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, right? Because the mana is worse, right? Like, because there's just nothing wrong with the Last Breath. At least when that Last Breath was new, it was clever.
I actually wonder if there is something wrong with the Last Breath.
It's not a good card.
Somebody head over to Spy Colony Facebook group and just tell me how many times that your opponent has a mage naming Plowshares and a mage naming Dreadnought, and you have successfully maged Last Breath the Plowshares mage, and then followed up with the swords on the Dreadnought mage, and then cast Dreadnought, and then proceeded to win the game. Because how many copies of Last Breath are we running?
2?
That's an insane amount of card sideboard space.
Well,
your least favorite number.
Well, but it's different because you need to outmaneuver the Swords to Plowshares game. But there's also disenchants in this matchup. Like, it's weird. Disenchant doesn't kill Meddling Mage, but it does stop Dreadnought. And then, if people have Brain Freeze versus not have Brain Freeze, that's a completely different.
That just means you have one more thing to name with a Meddling Mage. You don't have to name Brain Freeze the Meddling Mage because normally you're going to go coast to coast on the Meddling Mage. But I'm just saying.
But they might have Meddling Mage. Like, the whole point of the Last Breath is that both players might have Meddling Mage.
Yeah, but then what? But you know what both players won't have?
The crazy thing is you play the first Meddling Mage and you name Meddling Mage. Like, that is wild.
Then your Meddling Mage will just get Plowshared, and then your opponent can play Meddling Mage.
Yeah, but I don't know. Sometimes that's what you do.
It sounds like we have to test the blue-white Dreadnought mirror if anybody is thinking about bringing it to Lobster Con. But
I played it a lot last year.
I mean, the mirror, the blue-white Dreadnought mirror.
Yeah.
We didn't have 2 blue-white Dreadnought decks sleeved last year. Your Dreadnought deck was mono blue, by the way.
Are you sure?
You were playing Landstill. Your deck boxes were Landstill, Fluctuator, mono blue Dreadnought, the Rock.
Rock.
I don't even think you had a Goblins deck built at the time.
I didn't.
You still had Rifter in a box.
I still have Return to Box now.
Yeah. You didn't have a box with Blue-White Dreadnought in it. In Iron Man versus the Hulk, I asked you if you wouldn't mind me putting all the white cards in, and you were like, no, that's annoying.
It was annoying. Do you not want to talk about this Ponza deck?
Not as much as I like. I love the ground that we've covered. It's like, it's what I live for. Because it's just like, it's
That's
thinking
a good
about
episode.
thinking.
I just thought you wanted to talk about this Ponza deck that won.
I wanted to talk about the Ponza deck if I didn't feel like talking about anything else, but like I don't know. I'm like looking at the Ponza deck and I'm just kind of like 2 main deck Pyrokinesis, no Stone Rains, and Dwarven Miners. What do you think? Oh, Avalanche Riders. Oh my god, this played Avalanche Riders instead of Stone Rain. That's very interesting, I guess.
Well, it's their Ball Lightning. It's like half a Ball Lightning, half a Stone Rain.
It's a third of a ball.
Well, no. If you get 2 swings in, right, like it's 2/3 of a Ball Lightning for 8 mana. There's a so let's just run through this deck. 4 Mog Fanatic, 3 Grim Lavamancer, 3 Dwarven Miner. The Dwarven Miners, I don't know about that card.
Get them. What's Replenish gonna do?
Land top 8 at a Grand Prix with Dwarven Miner in his main deck. 3 Avalanche Rider. That's another card that I'm not in love with that number. 2 Shard Phoenix. That's where I'm gonna buy back those slots from the Shard Phoenix. 4 Bolt, 4 Ensign, 4 Firebolt, 2 Pyrokinesis, 4 Pillage, and then wait, how many lands do we have? 6. Is there 1 Barbarian Ring?
Yes.
27 lands. Jeez, 6 mountains and 27 lands. 4 Gitu encampment. 4 assorted fetch lands, which I don't even know if these fetch lands are any good. Right, the only thing that the fetch lands are working with is 3 Grim Lavamancer here. Right, other than I guess thinning. But if you want to thin, why are you playing 27 lands?
Well, you want to thin because you have 27 lands. So you want 4 lands in your opener, but you want like 4 fewer lands in your deck later.
Yeah, so the problem is this deck is liable to be the control a bunch of the time.
I'll point this
about dealing damage to myself.
I'll point this out. If you're playing this deck, I would suggest playing 4 Wooded Foothills so that you can go Wooded Foothills Mog Fanatic on turn 1 more often. And
just
then you'll look like
your opponent off.
Yeah, you'll look like you can look like Goblins or Burn, and you'll look like neither. If you go Bloodstained Mire Mog Fanatic, then you can only be Burn, and you still won't be Burn, which is fair. But yeah, I don't know. I watched a couple games. I think I watched it beat Burn, which didn't surprise me. It surprised the commentators, but
it would surprise me. Why do you think it's good against Burn?
Because Burn has 20 lands, and this has 7 land destruction spells. So it has all the cards that are good against Burn, which is Mog Fanatic, Pyrokinesis, Grim Lavamancer if it ever untaps, and then Bolts is just good, right? And Mishra's Factory is really good against Burn. Gitu Encampment is passable against Burn, and then it can sometimes mana screw the Burn opponent. Like it's just a Burn deck that has heavier costed cards, so like it's more likely to convert its like lands into value. So it's like got double edge, right? If the Burn player is mana screwed, then they're get mana screwed even harder, and the Burn player is mana flooded, then they lose because
they're mana flooded.
They're mana flooded, right? So like if they're mana flooded and you drew all your pillages, sure, but like I just like watched on camera and I was like, Burn player like was kept off 2 or 3 lands, and then they just went to town. But yeah, I don't know. You've got Pyrokinesis. We talked about that. Like, Firebolt is pretty bad against Burn. I mean, Avalanche Riders has got to be good against Burn, right?
Just
it's 2 damage. Yeah, 2 damage
plus land and block. Don't even pay the echo. Just threaten to block. There's like an Earthquake and 2 Pyroclasm in the sideboard. Is that 1 Black Vice?
2 Black Vice. I can't zoom in. I'm gonna try to zoom in any further. Anyways, this is the winner of the 101 player Premodern Universal Champs, and I can't tell if it's an additional Black Vice. It looks like it is, so it looks like it's 2 Black Vice in the sideboard.
Is that 2 Tormod's Crypt then?
Yeah, 2 Vice, 2 Crypts, 2 Clasm, 2 Anarchy, 1 Earthquake, 2 Overload, 4 Blasts. Opting for Red Blast instead of Pyroblasts. This deck would have benefited from Curse Scroll. I guess it's using all its mana on manlands. I mean, Mishra's Factory is just Curse Scroll, you know? It's just a more efficient Curse Scroll that you don't have to empty your hand for.
I mean, dealing with creatures in play is pretty good. You have like one card in hand and your opponent can't cast their ball lightning.
Anyways, what is your take on the Universal Champion, the champion of the universe, the champion of the pre-modern universe?
I would not
mono red Ponza.
This deck myself, but I like certain elements of it, right? Like I think I could get behind like a 24 land version with 4 Avalanche Rider. I think I could get behind that.
3, 4. So it's 4, 16 plus 6. This is 23 lands.
It's 27.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20. Oh, it is 27. Jesus Christ. Well, some of them are wastelands. It's fine. I mean, you're playing 15 spell lands. It's pretty fine.
Like I think I would play.
I agree with you. I wouldn't play fetches in this deck.
I think I would play Jackal Pup instead of Dwarven Miner and
you're just gonna turn it into burn.
And Shard Phoenix, and I would play Dwarven Miner in the sideboard. No,
I
could
turn this into Pup Rain.
Yeah, it could be Pup Rain. That's cool.
It's literally, if you take out... Okay, here are the cards in this deck that aren't in burn. Miner, Riders, Pillage, Shard Phoenix. Pyrokinesis is in the burn sideboard, so it gets an honorable mention. And then the entire mana base, right? But you could just play this deck with more burn spells, and it would be totally fine, because you could have Curse Scroll. You're playing all these lands, just play Curse Scroll. Play the Earthquakes main instead of Pyrokinesis. And instead of Shard Phoenix, you play Sulfuric Vortex.
Like I just hate Earthquake on principle a lot of the time. If you're a deck that's liable to be the control more than half the time, which I believe this deck to be the control a large percentage of the time, like Earthquake is such a liability.
It's not.
It's different. It's different when you're with a beatdown.
No, it's just. But you're not. Earthquake is insane. Because the point is, the creature, it's at least interesting versus goblins, because goblins has some things that resemble reach, right? But nobody is playing red-green Call the Herd Bolt, right? So if they're a Call the Herd deck, you can Earthquake yourself down to 1. It doesn't matter, right? I just don't believe you. It's just like I've cast this card Earthquake against decks that are interested in lowering my life total, and I always win. Because if they're doing it with creatures, then they just got Earthquaked.
Man, Goblins is so weird. Like I kept beating Tron with Goblins with like just casting 1 spell a turn.
I mean, that's what Goblins does, right?
Right, like I just didn't even have Lackey. And then like if I had a Lackey draw, like good night.
Well, it's just because Sonny wasn't using my Tron list with Power Sync. And
he had Power Sync.
Oh, he had Power Sync?
Yeah.
Damn. Okay. I have to go find his list then. Maybe he only had 1 Power Sync. You should play the perfect number 2 Power Syncs.
I saw him Power Sync somebody.
I think it's interesting because I also watched Sonny play against Goblins on Magic Online, and he got a Master Core on the table, and then he proceeded to lose because he just didn't have enough mana to operate the Master Core, and he was locked under it. But Master Core in the Tron deck really bugs me, because your opponent has just like spent the whole game with like nothing to do with their Swords to Plowshares, and then you like finally give them a target that also makes you discard a card. But obviously its role is not to defeat decks that contain Swords to Plowshares, so maybe there's something there. This Ponza deck is probably good against Tron. Dwarven Miner, GG.
Oh wow. I mean they have Swords to Plowshares, but Swords to Plowshares is a combo card in Tron. Like you need white swords and Swords to Plowshares.
It's a combo card in Replenish too, right? Like man, these the cards and this texture stuff. I don't know. It just like it's weird because we all know this intuitively, right? Like there's an intuition that you have about like I didn't add Swords to Plowshares to Replenish because I was thinking about whether Replenish was Gear 1 or Gear 2. But now that I have this framework, I can like think about it and just be like, it's at least interesting because people are getting in debates. They're just like, okay, 1, 2, 3, or 4 Swords to Plowshares. Nobody's playing 1 actually, and nobody's playing 0. It starts at 2.
I think 1 is fine. 1 is a miracle.
I think Mana Leak is pretty sick, and it's doing a little bit of carrying the weight for Swords to Plowshares, but the deck is poor at playing at instant speed because all of its cards are 4 mana sorceries. But then sometimes Mana Leak pivots to being a protection card because once you get to 6 mana, then you Mana Leak to protect your 4 mana sorceries. So turns 1 through 5 mana leak on defense, and then turns 6 on mana leak on offense. Pretty interesting stuff. But this Ponza deck, it's pretty sick. I mean, one thing is that it does make me. The appealing thing to me about it is that I think a lot of people like this concept of like a slow burn deck, like a burn deck that just has more late game. Thanks to Mishra's Factory, like it doesn't run stuff like Ball Lightning or Shock. Like Firebolt over Shock is obviously a whole different thing. But like,
well, like this deck has 27 lands. Like they're planning to buy back the.
Yeah, they're planning to
Firebolt.
buy back the Firebolt, exactly. Which is like interesting because like you could make the Firebolt Seal of Fire, and then instead of playing 4 of those lands, you can play additional copies of Shock if you wanted to shock them twice. But it obviously is planning to do more with its mana. But I wanted to, when I got really into the weeds of like, okay, how to make a Lanny burn worse against burn, I was just like, well, you just play the Earthquakes main, you play a lot of lands, you play more Curse Scroll, and you cut Ball Lightning, and you play Mishra's Factory. And I like that there's so much you can do up and down the curve in red decks. You can go as crazy as red deck Nguyen's and just go, full on Urza's Rage Thawing Glaciers, and you can kind of be medium Ponza, and you can be here, like, which I would say is like, it's like
Aggro Ponza.
Yeah, it is a pretty aggressive Ponza deck. Like the Mog Fanatic and Ponza decks like always gets me because we in Alvaro's PSS last year, he like did a bunch of Stone Raining, and then he had this Mog Fanatic, and then his opponent just I don't remember, they played Wall of Blossoms or something, and then that was the end of the Ponzaing, or that was the end of the Mog Fanatic. Like I think Mog Fanatic is like the weirdest card in the strategy, but then if you're only playing 10 dedicated land destruction spells, maybe it's, I don't know. How would you evaluate this on Gear 1, Gear 2?
Wow, that's a good question. I think this is rarely Gear 1. Although, in the sense that, like, we were talking about Oath Ponza being always the beatdown, it is always the beatdown in the same sense, but I don't know if that makes it Gear 1. Right? Like, Shard Phoenix, for example, is not a good Gear 1. Like,
It does both stop your opponent and kill your opponent really slowly.
Kind of. Like I think this Shard Phoenix just looks awful to me in this deck. Like casting my Pyroclasm for 5 mana.
You're literally never going to lose to Landstill if you have Shard Phoenix in your deck. Just think about that. Just like never.
What if they cast Angels?
They could have Humility. You're right. You are right. What if they cast Angels? Never mind.
Like I have a healthy respect for Shard Phoenix because of Oath, This seems awful to me. Like, just seems really bad.
Okay, well, kudos to the winner.
Like, wouldn't you rather just have another Avalanche Rider?
I would rather have another Avalanche Rider, yeah. If you ask me, I would also have Earthquake. And I would not have Dwarven Miner because I wouldn't want it to die to my Earthquakes.
I think Dwarven Miner is great. I just don't think I'd play it main deck.
Yeah, I'd probably play it sideboard.
It's so slow. And like every deck that it's great against can answer it 1/2 creature.
That's true, but that's okay, right? Because you're still trading 1-for-1 against those decks, and like your red deck is built to grind. So it's just like, what else was going to be in that slot?
Is it built to grind? This doesn't have a lot of card advantage. This card advantage is like Grim Lavamancer, Avalanche Rider.
Yeah, but it's built to grind in a Gear 3 sensibility. That if we're gonna play a long game, eventually your life total is gonna get it reduced to 0. It folds. It doesn't like it. They put 2 Anarchy in the sideboard. They're not even going ready to like. They're ready to fight against Cop Red, right?
My fight against Cop Red is sending the Mishra's Factory.
Yeah, so we got both. We have Send Mishra's Factory, and we have
This deck
Anarchy.
is great against Cop Red because of the land destructions.
I mean, great. Yeah. It's better to have Pillage than Incinerate against Cop Red, but this says Pillage and Incinerate. It's better to have Pillage than Ball Lightning against Cop Red, but it's interesting. I think this deck is like is super interesting. Obviously, it cut through the cut through whatever the meta was at the Universal Champs. I don't think we have any deep metagame reports. I think somebody at least broke down the top 8, but it would take too much scrolling to find it. I think that it is super interesting to just like try to go into a world where you have just a red deck that doesn't Fire Blast and instead Shard Phoenixes.
Oh man, doesn't have Fire Blast? Like, I guess I knew that.
It only has 10 mountains.
I guess I knew that, but like now that you say it out loud, I'm like, oh, barf.
Yeah.
Barf.
No, that is
Are you playing in Kaplan's thing next weekend?
Oh man, that's next weekend already. Yeah, that's my plan is to play 5-color Dreadnought. I do have to admit something embarrassing, which is that when I came up with the 5-color Dreadnought concept, I thought it was so good that I had to hide the technology. Then I started playing it and I was like, okay, it's not so good.
Well, yeah, so I'm toss up. I might just try to run it back, get my championship belt back.
Go for red deck. Yeah, interesting.
Or play Monoblue.
Monoblue Tide. Monoblue Tide's a good choice.
I think Monoblue Tide just seems just like the best deck to me. It's like so impressive.
Do you think it beats Grotog? Probably not. What's your answer to Call or Chain of Vapor?
Deck has like Powder Keg. Powder Keg your mocks at the same time, buddy.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So I have to Meddling Mage Keg. Yeah, that's pretty good. I don't have an answer to Powder Keg. Powder Keg
like
sick.
Disc?
I don't care about Disc, right? Because if you want to spend 4 mana to do that effect, like you deserve it, okay? But Powder Keg is 2 mana. That is more impressive to the Grog player.
I mean, like you're gonna get Force Spiked.
I might play around it.
Good. Then you're going to get Force Spiked on a 2-speller.
I don't know. I don't think I've ever played the matchup. I play so much Grotog. I've played against Tide with a bunch of different decks, and I don't think I've ever played against Monoblue Tide.
I found it to be incredibly impressive.
Yeah. Lobster Con is going to be sick. Do you think you win game 1? You probably just lose game 1 against Burn, though, so that kind of sucks.
I feel like Burn is a very challenging matchup, to say the least.
That kind of vetoes the entire deck for me in any field.
For Lobster Con?
Well, yeah, for Lobster Con especially. But Burn Dreadnought and Goblins specifically, not enough players play Oath, but Burn Dreadnought and Goblins, there really isn't a deck that beats all 3.
Monoblue beats Goblins. I think it's pretty good against Dreadnought.
Yeah, but it loses to Burn. That's like the question. That's the deal.
I don't know. Does it lose a 5-game series?
It doesn't lose. Nobody plays 5-game series, and it does lose a 5-game series. It's more advantage in a 3-game series because once again, you've mixed up the heuristic. You're better in a 5-game series if your game 1s are strong.
Oh, well, does it win a 3-game series?
I mean, what are you doing? You're boarding in 5 blasts, 2 chill, and hoping that you draw them in the word and they don't draw their blasts.
It's the Burn matchup's pretty weird, right? Like Quicksand is an overachiever in game 1 because unlike this deck from the Europeans, it doesn't have Wasteland and Rishon Port. Oh man, you know what I did that was a sicko? I stifled a Wasteland on Thursday.
Proud of you.
That was
You and your 1-mana Stone Rains. Meanwhile, you're letting your opponent 1-mana Stone Rain you by running a creature into your Quicksand.
Look, man. You just put them all together.
This deck has 4 copies of Counterspell and 8 colorless lands. Just kind of makes me want to die.
Yeah, but it has, Impulse.
You know what's hilarious about the Tide Control Grotog matchup is that both of us are going to have AK, so then we're going to play the AK game. Do you have what's your approach to the AK game?
Just don't worry about it.
Just don't worry about it. Just cast it if you draw it.
Cast it for man. I mean, look, so you know that I'm hyper vigilant about hand sizing. That's actually a thing that I care about. Like I don't want to discard.
Yeah,
but I think like
that's the reason why I've lost many games of Magic is because I was too afraid to go to cleanup.
I feel like in these matchups where AKs might matter, hand sizing is going to matter a lot, right? Because the thing that I find to be really impressive about decks like Tron is that you have cards like Skycloud Egg where you stow a card in hand on the battlefield. It allows you to break the rule of 7, and like I think like little things like that are like the difference between, like everybody wins the games that are supposed to be blowouts, right? And like the people who win the games that aren't supposed to be blowouts find things like stowing how you taught me, like slow trips, like portent. That's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Right, like understanding those things, which allow.
I mean, that's my argument to like get you on board. Like portent is still insane cuckoo bananas. Period.
No, but like that's how you get to. You win these games like that have like turn 15 interplay, and you have to be cognizant of those things, and then you can plan for them. Yeah. But if you're not cognizant of them, you can't plan for them. If you can't plan for them, your opponent can. You're just gonna lose. You're gonna lose those games. So, what is my approach to the AK game? You don't want to cast the first AK. So I can tell you that.
So right? both players just not cast there?
I was watching Andy play a lot, and he casts an impulse. Or sorry, I think he casts an AK. I think, and I said I think I would have cast the impulse, and he's like, "There's nothing I need."
Yeah.
And I'm like, and so if there's nothing you need, then you just cycle, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
I do that with Grog all the time.
But I was
like
thinking,
a cantrip discipline.
I just wanted to use the impulse to get another AK. That was what I was thinking. And then my next
yeah, you're like, I do need something. I need AKs, but you can do it in the opposite order, so it's fine.
Yeah, I totally got it when he said there's nothing I need, and then I was just like, he's just got like 6 or 7 cards in hand, and I'm like, I guess he can just interplay with whatever his opponent's got going on. I just found it to be very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, in a deck that has AK and impulse especially, but I kind of had that. I mean, that's like pretty common. There was a pretty, this is a pretty popular discussion in Legacy, right? Which is just like, you have Brainstorm fetched, do you cast it on turn 1 or turn 2?
I don't know. It depends on my hand.
I know it depends on your hand, but the reason why it was an interesting question is because you would argue that people don't do it one way or another often enough effectively. And, or they wouldn't think about it with enough like depth. They wouldn't give it enough thought. But I think that, it was interesting. It's interesting in Grog because casting it later has that kind of lava spike thing where you can get more value because it puts a counter on your Dryad. Or the biggest thing is just the question of just like, do I know what I want? And then the third most hilarious thing is, should I portend my opponent instead? You walked over to me while I was playing Magic Online in the bar. And you're like, oh, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm playing online. And I passed my turn, and I had a fetch land and a portent in my hand. I was like, damn it, Mike, you made it so I didn't cast this portent on turn 1. And then at a later time, I don't know, I cast the portent and shuffled it and got awesome value or whatever. And it was like all fine. And it was just like interesting to think about because like I kind of had the turn mapped out. I'm like, I'm just gonna cast this portent, it's gonna be great. And then I like literally just like didn't cast the portent and everything was okay.
I walked over and your opponent had played a Defiant Falcon, so I assumed it was game 1 because like there's nothing could possibly.
I can't beat a Defiant Falcon. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's just nothing that could possibly be going on in the universe if
I scooped right? Game 1 to Defiant Falcon.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, you're dead, and you're like, oh no, it's a sideboard game. I have Engineered Plagues, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's dead because like
yeah,
you just can't trip into Engineered Plagues. It was so funny, right? Like where you're just playing these Engineered Plagues that he's just like civvying for civvy, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh, you're gonna Engineered Plague into Fire Ice for the civvy.
Yep.
But then he's just gonna cast another civvy with the first one. So it was really interesting. But he eventually just scooped to multiple Engineered Plagues, right?
Yeah. He scooped to multiple Engineered Plague, but also I had 1,000 cards in hand, and so it was like he's like, yeah, this is not going to work out the way that I want it
to. What else do you want to talk about? Anything? I think we had a good podcast.
I think we had a great podcast. I'm very excited about this theory stuff. Because it really just kind of like brought a lot of like these different ideas together, which was just kind of like, okay, like I've been calling every deck as having 3 gears, but it's really nice to just.
I don't think they all have 3 gears. I think a lot of them do, right?
Well,
but like
like don't get me wrong, like Fluctuator has gear 1 or a different kind of gear 1. And a lot of combo decks are like that. It's like their only plan is to kill their opponent and do a second order answer thing, like stop your opponent from stopping you. But that's like very important. Like that's a very important analysis. And it kind of just goes deeper when we talk about sideboard pivots and stuff like that. But like overall, a lot of decks exist in this continuum. And it really does go back to who's the beatdown, but it kind of like helps if you ask these who's the beatdown questions, and you're just like, well, what kinds of cards are in each deck? And I think it's really cool that the fact that burn specifically being comprised entirely of cards that can be cast effectively to stop your opponent or kill your opponent, making it sort of the most like sort of agile, versatile deck under this notion. Is also like super interesting. Like I don't think you can think of a deck like Burn where 30 of its cards can be used in as a means to stop your opponent or kill your opponent.
Yeah, so Burn's the best. It's the most cerebral.
Yeah, and in a sense that it is. It certainly is. I think it's a great choice for Lobster Con. It's obviously going to be picked in high numbers in Lobster Con. Unfortunately, that precludes you from wanting to play Lanny Burn, which is going to make it overall worse. But yeah, I mean, it's just you just win game 1. It's really awesome to play a deck that you just sleeve up and just like most of the time you're going to win game 1, and the only exception is if you get turn 2 Dreadnought, and then all of a sudden you are the control.
Sometimes you still get there.
It's true. Yeah, I got nothing else. I'm thankful to our supporters. Special shout out to Sunny. We've done a lot of work chatting in the supporter Discord, trying to help Sunny with his deck choice. He's running into this. Sunny said something interesting, which was like, he's like, I want to play a deck that has more variance because I'm not as strong of a player. So I don't want to play a deck that's going to be skill testing. I would rather blow people out with, Teferi's response.
Well, man, I love Burn from that standpoint, but it's like Burn has such a high skill ceiling, and then it also has so many free wins. But you know what else does?
Fluctuator. Well, Dreadnought is the perfect example.
Yeah.
If you wanted to win because of variance, I would just play Monoblue Dreadnought. You only have one thing that you have to think about, and the mulliganing is super easy. You just look at your hand, and you're like, well, this hand doesn't really have Fire Ice and Dreadnought in it. It's like if it's got double Portent that I'm in, but
I keep a lot of hands that just have spell, just have like if I'm on the play, I have some counter spells and some, gushes and opts and stuff. My hand will improve.
I mean, your hand always improves because the deck is only lands, cantrips, and combo pieces. Of course, your draw step. Yeah, the counter is a combo piece. We went through this. The foil is just the A plus B plus C aspect of the combo. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we should pitch that to Sunny. We should just tell Sunny to play Monoblue Dreadnought if he wants.
Top 8'd a $1,000 tournament with Monoblue Dreadnought this year.
Yeah, I think he's just like worried. Maybe he's worried that people are going to have sideboard cards against it. Like
they will, but they have sideboard cards against the good decks.
I know that's like always the silliest like argument. It's just like, okay, if your opponent doesn't have sideboard cards against you, it means that they're confident that they will just defeat you with their normal strategy. All
right, you know what? Actually might be a good variance deck that doesn't have like too high of a skill ceiling. Terra Oath, right? Like you just get these like blowout disruption hands, and there's just no decisions.
It doesn't have like a astronomical skill ceiling, but the way that it does test your skill is not very intuitive. It's very difficult to play the deck intuitively because, at least for me, because you're like sitting there and you're like really, really like you can only do one thing this turn. Like I don't know. It's like a weird. There's not good heuristics for playing the game, playing that deck after you're done casting your Stone Rains and stuff like that. So sometimes you'll have won by that point, but other times, like I don't know, you just watch a Fran video and he just like says something, right or wrong, he just says something that I'm just like looking at the board state and I was just like, that just doesn't occur to me at all. I was just like, I have no like, it's just like, am I going to port this turn or get in? That kind of stuff. And like, you kind of need to be intentional about what you're doing with regards to that. You'll probably lose a game if you like don't attack a turn you're supposed to, basically.
I mean, the margins.
That's the nice thing about Soltari Cleric.
Soltari Priest?
Soltari Priest, yeah.
He always attacks.
You don't have to think. I mean, if you want, you can just play Dothy Slayer.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's always better and worse play, but, like, I think that the margins in Terra Oath are so high, right? Like, I don't think there's not a lot of close games.
I mean, my experience has been, like, if you really... I don't know. I just don't know if I think that the deck is straightforward to pilot, or if the thing is, there's just different kinds of difficulty, and all I'm saying is that there are sometimes games where like a decision that's very difficult to see decides the outcome of your game, and that happened to me all the time when I'm playing these like decks that don't play any instants for some reason. Like it's just like so interesting because instants and sorceries are kind of like pre-flop and post-flop bets, right? It's just like, I need to see your cards first. Like, I need to see what is going to happen before acting. And like, it is so awkward to act and then like act because of what you believe your opponent has. So you're like sitting there and it's like, oh, okay, if my opponent has this, I shouldn't attack with Treetop Village. But you have to decide, right? So we talk about how instants are better for agency, but I think it's actually really interesting because it's easier to play instants than sorceries because your default is that you're the dealer. You act last. You're on the button. So yeah, I don't know. I find that to be difficult. Maybe other people don't, but I've lost a lot of equity in my oath games just because I sequence my sorcery speed spells wrong. Which is funny because I didn't have that problem with Parfait. Either that or Parfait was just so powerful that it just didn't matter the sequence that I played my sorcery speed spells.
I mean, you're drawing 4 cards a turn.
Yeah,
that goes a long way.
Yeah,
and then if you have a scroll rack, you might be drawing like 11 cards a turn.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I would say Monoblue Dreadnought. Excellent choice. I would say not Burn. I would say White Weenie, like the least interactive White Weenie deck you can come up with. Just like guys, like I think
no variant. The whole point of this is to get the variance wins. Like White Weenie is not that's not the deck you sign up for if you want variance wins. Like who are you rolling over? The Rock? Like straight up there's 30% the Rock every year at Lobster Con. Like straight up the worst matchup on earth. Right?
It's fine, and it's not 30%, and it gets lower. It gets lower as we spout anti-Rock propaganda on this podcast.
I don't know. It didn't stop the people who played the Rock the previous year from coming back with the Rock last year.
Well, another year has passed. The number line goes down. I mean, you're right, but I'd rather play White. I mean, I guess it's tough because White Weenie's not powerful. It's like you want a deck that has a little bit of a good amount of variance so that you don't have to like skill test too hard or just be faced with like really tough decisions. I think Monoblue Dreadnought is like the way to go because like the tough decisions do come, but like they are at least, I don't know. I'm talking for myself. We need like a show where we do like a little bit more like a deck therapist kind of thing. Cause like, I don't know what type of person Sonny is or what type of player he is. Cause like when I look at Monoblue Dreadnought, it's like all the decisions are just very, very simple.
He loves pre-modern.
It's true. He's playing everything. He was like, I bought Pit Rack. He was like, I need a deck that beats Dreadnought and Burn. So I bought Pit Rack. I'm like, that doesn't beat Burn. And he's like, yeah, I know.
I was just like, Pit Rack doesn't seem very good to me.
It's not.
But I said like I can imagine it beating Burn. Like I played against Pit Rack at LC 2022 on the day 2 tournament when I played Burn, and I almost lost. I mean, I won, but I almost lost. You know, like you can get raced by the rack. You know, their cards are more powerful than yours on an individual basis.
It is possible to lose to Pit Rack on Burn, but I don't think it will happen often. Just as it's possible to lose to Burn when you're playing Dreadnought. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting when people talk like my my advice is going to be very obvious, and it's the advice that I took last year to great success. Take the deck that you've been playing a lot of and you've been winning a lot with. So if you play it a lot, you don't win a lot with it, don't take it. If you don't play it a lot, don't bring it. And if you're just there to have a good time, just obviously take a deck list that you look interesting. But if you're interested in winning, like, I was going to play Replenish at Lobster Con last year, and I switched to Parfait because I played Parfait, or I thought I just soul searched, and I was like, well, I never lose with this deck, so I should probably play it. It's like, it doesn't matter if people are going to bring land still. Doesn't matter if, there's going to be like some hate or like whatever, just like, it just doesn't matter. Just like, and
you were like, your deck was tuned. You knew what you were doing every turn.
Yeah.
You had two of the most powerful enchantments in the history of the format.
Yeah.
Like, your opponents couldn't really play Magic.
Yeah, it was great. And this year going in, like, that's just my attitude towards Grotog. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's just like, the deck doesn't look good, doesn't play good, but I don't lose often with it, so I'm going to bring it.
All right.
Love Spy Colony.
Love this Ponza deck. I love Mike.